It's 2019, and Love Quinn works as the head chef at her family's upscale grocery store in Navrin in Los Angeles, California. And this is you, from her perspective. One day after her shift, Love is shopping for her dinner when she notices a cute guy lingering near the produce. As she has learned to live for the moment after the unexpected end of her last relationship, Love makes a bold move to break the ice, holding out a peach and deadpan asking the man if it looks like a butt. He hesitates, caught off guard by her confidence, but he admits that it does, stepping closer to inform Love that actually, all peaches look like butts. She turns up the heat, suggestively remarking that bell peppers can appear quite vaginal depending on how you cut them, and notices that he remains reserved and shy, so Love teases the man, asking if he was following her. He says that initially he wasn't until he saw her and then he was, apologizing if he seems creepy, but Love is thrilled to imagine somebody spotting her from afar and being drawn closer. When she notices what appears to be a staff apron, Love asks if he works at the store. Confirming that he just started in the cafe, the mystery man introduces himself as Will Bettelheim, and Love explains that she manages the kitchen, but doesn't mention that her family owns a Navrin to avoid scaring him off. As working together means that she'll be running into him again, Love leaves the scene satisfied, having made a good first impression. She tells Will that she'll see him in the break room and heads home to make dinner while envisioning their next encounter. A few days later, Love watches as her brother 40 gives the new guy Will a hard time over a book display, and she joins him as he's tasked with taking over the register. Love assures Will that 40 almost never actually fires anybody and stares at him, trying to figure out what his movie is, but Will gets worried that Love is going to get them both in trouble, so he walks off to return to work. Love shakes it off, and after her shift, she visits the DMV, where she notices the next woman in line being skipped over due to a language barrier. So she speaks up to ask if anybody can interpret for her and easily finds someone to volunteer. Just then, as if being rewarded for her good deed, Love locks eyes with Will at another window and beams as she approaches him, remarking on the kismet coincidence. Love defends that she doesn't always make a scene like she just did, but Will is impressed with her kind performance. So she wishes him luck on his test, leaving him with a kiss on the cheek, and her self-assured charm proves successful when she accepts an incoming friend request from Will later that day. After overhearing from Calvin at the store that Will has suffered a major sunburn, Love sneaks a look at his employee file to find his home address and discovers that it's just around the corner from her apartment. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Love makes a detour on her way home from work, arriving at Will's door with apple cider vinegar to soothe his sunburn and show him how thoughtful she can be. When she's finished applying the antidote, Love spots cheap ramen on Will's counter and questions his taste, discovering that he's never even read her favorite author Joan Didion, and Love challenges Will to see what he's missing out on, demanding that he come along on a food adventure to share her version of the city with him, hoping he'll start to see it the way that she does. The pair set out, and they start with Love's favorite food truck before making a few more stops in search of finding Will the perfect bite, and they end up overlooking the city, sharing a pair of earbuds like the perfect movie montage come to life just for them. Despite Will's dissatisfied reviews, Love concludes her research and takes him back to a Navrin to cook for him based on what she's learned throughout the night. She reads him as old-fashioned and someone who craves things that are made right by people who care. Sensing their shared appreciation for authenticity, Love bakes her signature roast chicken for Will, knowing that you can tell everything about a chef from the roast chicken and wanting to share her passion with him. Will takes a bite and he's absolutely speechless before confirming that it's perfect. Love celebrates but lets out a sigh as she feels that she has to explain that she's been married before. She tells Will that her first husband James got sick and then he died, and she admits that it's lonely to be widowed at such a young age because nobody seems to understand. But Love believes that she can see in Will how he's been through it too, feeling real love and experiencing real loss. She asks if he fell in love with LA, and Will concedes that it's not so terrible, so Love gives him a copy of Play It As It Lays by Joan Didion to try and broaden his horizons, and then she heads home to read her own copy, cozy in a blanket on her balcony, imagining the warmth of reading while wrapped in Will's arms. After a few days of chatting and flirting with Will at work, Love invites him to the fish market to see her in action, but every time she turns around, he keeps wandering off. She buys them both coffee and catches up with Will again, deciding to stop overthinking and just kiss him already. He's speechless for a moment as Love awaits a reaction, and Will pulls her back in to kiss again. It feels so right and romantic that Love invites Will to lunch so that he can meet her friends, and he says that he'd love to, but he later texts Love and backs out with a lie about an errand for 40 as an excuse. Love lets it slide for now and meets her friends as planned, filling them in on what's happening with Will and their moment in the market. Her friend Gabe recognizes that Love's heart is ready to get back in the game, and she admits that she really likes Will. But Love says that she thought that James was her soulmate and she'd never find anyone who makes her miss him like he did, so she's confused about the way that she'll randomly miss Will even though she barely knows him. Her friends reassure her that she's not being crazy and she's just falling for this new guy, so Love shows up to Will's apartment that night to give him a chance to explain why he lied. Love reveals to an oblivious Will that 40 is her twin brother, and they tell each other everything, so she knows that he wasn't busy with a work errand. And Will realizes that must also mean that Love's parents own a Navrin. She says that she didn't want to complicate things by telling him, but he complicated things by lying, and she wants to know why. Love suspects that Will is feeling wounded after being hurt by his ex and relates that her husband hurt her too, but explains that's why she just says things now, because she knows if you wait for the perfect moment to say something, then you might never get the chance. Love tries to embrace Will and tell him that he doesn't need to run away, but he shouts at her to stop, so Love pulls away and warns him that he never needs to yell as she leaves disappointed. But later that evening, she gets a text from Will and invites him over for dinner to talk. He shows up and says that he's glad that she kissed him, but it freaked him out because he wasn't expecting to meet someone like her or have something like this. Will explains that even though he wants it, he can't pursue what they have because he's worried about hurting Love like he hurt his ex. She asks if he wanted to hurt his ex, and Will admits that he didn't, so Love suggests that they both take care of themselves and do their best not to hurt each other. Love recognizes Will's hesitation and admits that relationships can be scary, but you don't get the goodness without the risk. He resists, arguing that he can't move on until his ex-girlfriend is gone for good, and Love compromises, accepting that they can be just friends for now. Ready to show him how supportive she can be, Love spends her work break with Will the next day, heading out back to burn a goodbye note to his ex in an effort to help him move on. Over the next few days, the pair become fast friends at a Navrin, swapping glances across the store during their shifts. Love leaves Will with a daily reminder of how sweet she can be as she bakes for him and leaves a treat in his locker every morning. He joins her when she volunteers at the soup kitchen during the day, and they text while watching baking shows together at night, exchanging food-based innuendos as the sexual tension between them simmers beneath the surface of their friendship. One morning, Love meets up with her friends at the park and they announce that they have a date for their wedding. Love is ecstatic and offers to bake their wedding cake, and they refuse at first, not wanting her to stress, but she pleads and says that baking is how she expresses her love, so they relent and happily accept. Love gushes that she has so many ideas, and Lucy calls her out because she knows that Love only bakes when she's frustrated. Sunrise guesses that Will canceled on Love again and admits that if she's determined to ignore the red flags, as if flaking once in a while is really a red flag, then she can follow his lead, but if she starts to feel desperate, that's when it's time to cut her losses. Love jokes that she's walking the line between shameless and desperate and heads to work, where she leaves Will another muffin in his locker, accompanied by a slightly sexual inside joke. But he doesn't respond to her advances, so the following day, she doesn't bother to bake him anything to send him a message about taking her kindness for granted. Will walks into work, remarking that he's already drooling, and Love laughs it off, knowing that he's going to find an empty locker. She waits in the break room doorway, watching for his reaction, and then asks if he was expecting something. Will says that it's not like he's owed anything, but follows after Love to say that he's grateful for whatever he can get. She returns to the kitchen, and Will trails behind her, claiming that he wants to apologize, but he can't explain what for, so Love leaves to let him figure himself out. A few hours later, Will calls to invite her to dinner at his apartment and presents Love with the Hilla wafers dish that she used to make with 40 when they were kids. When she looks to see Will's meal, she finds jelly sandwiches as he explains that was the best he could do as a kid. Love recognizes their shared experience of parental neglect and gets swept up in the romance of the moment, beaming with a smile as she stands to kiss Will. But he pulls away again and says that he didn't mean for this to be romantic, as if sharing his childhood trauma with Love could be anything but romantic. She asks if he's a sociopath, and he says that he's trying not to hurt her, but she pushes back again on his overprotection, saying it gives no credit to her ability to take care of herself. Love tells Will that she cares about his actions more than anything he says, and calls him out for sending mixed signals before storming out of his apartment. The following morning, Love meets up for tennis with 40, who reveals that he's working with Will to produce a new movie called False Promises. She launches the ball at him in frustration, and he calls her out for being touchy over his friendship with Will, insisting that she has to tell him if something is going on. Love accuses her brother of latching onto Will like it's a shortcut to make him successful instead of doing the work to help himself. 40 shoots back that Love is just afraid he'll become closer with Will than she ever could, hitting a nerve with his sister, so she storms off, shouting back at him to go write a script. Later that night, Love gets a text from Will saying that he's at a party with 40 who's wasted and out of control, and she tells him to get 40 out of there, meeting them both at Will's apartment. Love takes care of her brother and reassures him that whatever he ends up writing is going to be special because it came from him, and she puts him to bed on the couch as Will watches from outside. She leaves 40 to join him, and he apologizes for not looking after her brother. Love admits that it's been her job to watch over him ever since the summer when they were 13 and their parents were busy launching in Navrin. She says that they were left with a crazy au pair who exposed 40 to too much too soon and traumatized him. She refers to his relapse and explains that he's a good person who just does bad things sometimes. As Will relates to 40's damage, he tries to pull away again, saying that Love doesn't need to look after another broken soul. But she confesses that she's not perfect either and admits that everyone is a little broken and some pieces still manage to fit together. Will stares into her eyes, slowly grabbing her arm, and he pulls Love in for a dramatic kiss on the balcony before they sneak into the bedroom to hook up, doing their best to muffle the sounds of their passion to avoid waking 40 on the couch. Over the next few days, Love and Will hang out after work and she stays the night at his apartment, waking up ready to get hot and heavy but being interrupted by a phone call from 40. Considering that she ignored his calls 3 times the night before, Love answers and agrees to cut his hair the following afternoon, but makes an excuse to hang up as she's distracted again by Will. As Will is getting dressed, Love looks through his telescope to find that she can see her own apartment from his, and he sneaks up behind her, joking that it makes it easier to spy on her. Love smirks at the thought of Will watching her through his window, and they're interrupted by another text from 40. She asks Will not to mention what they're up to just yet because it makes her brother feel threatened when she gets close to somebody new, and he's especially fragile right after a relapse. As 40 keeps texting Will, Love suggests that they postpone their weekend trip to spend some time with her brother and smooth things over so it'll be easier to break the news of their relationship, and Will agrees, so they jump back into bed to make up for missing out on the weekend Santa Barbara sex. Later that day, Love texts Will to make plans for dinner, but he says that he has to fill in for Calvin's dodgeball team, so she pivots to make plans for brunch the following morning, and he confirms that it's a date. She texts her friends that Will has confirmed, and the next morning when he arrives at Navrin, Love is ready with a slight ambush, claiming that it was an accidental run-in, as her friends join the couple for brunch. After some early friction between Will and her friends, Sunrise and Lucy confess that they planned the chance encounter, and Love explains that she just didn't want Will to get nervous and feel pressured before meeting everyone. He seems to appreciate her reasoning and starts to mesh with the group better before they're interrupted again by 40, who realizes that Love has lied to him about her errand visiting wholesalers. She tries to de-escalate her brother and invites him to join them, but he refuses and reveals that he knows she and Will have been secretly dating. 40 throws his green juice on the ground, and Lucy scolds him that this isn't the place to be childish, so he storms out of the kitchen. Sunrise urges Love to let him go as she fights her instincts to chase after her brother. Love spends the evening baking through her fear in the safety of Will's apartment as she worries over 40's sobriety. She considers texting his sponsor but thinks that she might be overreacting, and Will reassures her that she's just being a good sister. He suggests that they can start including 40 in their plans and says that he'll be a better friend to her brother, helping him come up with a killer pitch for his movie script. Love admires how supportive Will is when he steps up as she kisses him and spends the night again. In the morning, she invites 40 over to Will's to cut his hair, and when Will wakes up, 40 apologizes for his behavior, saying that they're going to make a great team considering Love already told him that Will would assist with his project. But first, 40 asks Love to help him find a new suit, and they go shopping before work, where Love later overhears 40 and Will brainstorming ideas for the script. But by the time that she's closing at the end of the night, Love gets a text from 40 that he's taken a flight to Texas for the South by Southwest Film Festival at Will's insistence. She calls to confront him for trying to get her brother out of the picture. Will says that he just wasn't thinking and promises to do better, and Love accepts, admitting that's all she needed to hear, and she leaves to catch her own flight to Austin to serve as 40's sober companion. The following morning, as she's waiting for her brother, Love gets a text from Will that he's counting the minutes until she gets back. She tells him that they're heading into a screening and meets up with 40, who says that they're going to need another ticket for the woman that he met at breakfast, introducing Amy Adam, who joins the twins for the remainder of the festival. While 40 spends the next few days preoccupied with Amy, Love enjoys having Will all to herself as she works up the courage to invite him to her parents' upcoming vow renewal and wellness retreat. Silently hoping that her family's dysfunction will show him how different their own romance can be, Love warns Will that her mother is crazy and her father is emotionally unavailable, but it shouldn't be taken personally. He offers his enduring support, and Love suggests that they can rely on a special signal, invoking the sign for I love you like she used to use with James, but Will undermines the significance when he misinterprets the gesture, and her disappointment at being out of sync puts their code on hold for now. 40 calls from the store and Love notices that he's buying kombucha, worrying that he might be on his way to another relapse, but 40 explains that he's just buying it to pour out in honor of his comedian friend Henderson, who has unexpectedly killed himself. Recognizing the obvious trigger, Love tries to confirm that her brother's maintaining his sobriety and making it to his AA meetings, but he dismisses her justified concern as unwarranted negativity and hangs up the call. Love drops her phone in frustration, and Will steps up to reassure her that he can be her rock throughout the weekend and help distract her parents from their habit of hating on 40's new girlfriend. When they arrive at the weekend, Love introduces Will to her father Ray, and he's come prepared to impress, picking up on Ray's reference to a famous psychologist. Will compliments Love's mother Dottie before she pulls her husband away in search of a drink, and the pair are joined by 40. He calls over his new girl Amy, finally introducing her to Will, and Love hugs her, happy to see her again after hitting it off at the festival, and quietly thankful for her reinforcement supporting 40. A starving Love suggests that they should find some food, and the group join the twins' parents to talk over appetizers, until Ray walks away on 40 mid-sentence, uninterested in his son's latest project and unconcerned about sending him into a spiral. Everyone retreats to their tents, and Love rummages through the merch bag given to all of the guests when she catches Will biting his nails. Picking up on his nervous energy, Love insists that she doesn't care about what her parents think, but regrets that she has to pretend like she does to give a scripted speech in the ridiculous vow renewal ceremony. Will offers her space to work on her speech, suggesting that he can go and hang out with 40, and Love appreciates the assist from Will, keeping a protective eye on her brother, as she hasn't forgotten about the kombucha and knows it wasn't a good sign. She makes another attempt to deepen their bond, flashing her trusted I love you sign, and Will returns the gesture with full sincerity this time. The next morning, Love plays her part and participates in the weekend activities, starting with an early meditation session and then a visit with a wolf that gets an awkward laugh out of Amy, who protects 40 behind her when the animal growls at Will. During a later acceptance exercise, Love watches her brother in the center of the circle, manifesting the success of his new project with Amy, and he gets affirmed and embraced by Sunrise. 40 is followed by Gabe, who declares his desire to find the perfect partner and does so almost immediately, picking out a man in the crowd to accept his request and stand by his side. Amy takes her place in the middle of the group and confesses her lifelong dream of traveling to Italy, but she's left hanging as nobody steps forward, so Love sends in Will to save her. She sees Amy hesitate before hugging him, and Dottie steps up to encourage her not to fear Love and embrace Will in a hug, so she does, but she pulls away as she's feeling sick and leaves to her tent to lay down. But when Love follows to check on her a few minutes later, she finds Amy with Will in her tent, and she starts to get suspicious as the woman tries to cover, claiming that he snuck her some Claritin for her allergies. Will and 40 leave the ladies to get dressed, and Love sees her opening to get a better read on Amy, asking if she's really okay, as Love knows that her parents can be a handful. Amy admits that it's not them, but her own experience of getting lost with a guy who was bad news in a place like this that has her struggling to get through the weekend. Love understands how she can be triggered from proximity to a memory alone because trauma lives in the body, and she reassures Amy that she isn't crazy for how she's feeling emotionally and suggests that the shaman might be able to help her through it. Amy changes the subject, uplifting the mood, asking how Love and Will met. Love explains that they got together through work and jokes that she basically forced him into dating her. Then she turns the topic to Amy's work and asks if she's met Lucy, who works at the United Talent Agency, but Amy seems unfamiliar with the name, mistaking it for the airline before trying to laugh it off. Deepening her suspicions, Love lingers on the conversation while she's in her own tent trying to make sense of things with a tarot reading. When Will enters, she asks what he was talking about with Amy earlier, admitting that she caught her in a lie. Will is supportive of Love's suspicions, agreeing that they should get rid of Amy, but Love dismisses his aggressive suggestion, arguing that it would hurt 40. She presses Will on acting weird ever since they arrived, asking for his honesty, and he confesses that her family is crazy. Will starts rattling off complaints about her mom and her father and says that 40 made him eat a chalupa, and Love jumps up, knowing that Taco Bell is her brother's go-to food to order right before a major relapse. Will stops her and accuses Love of being obsessed with her brother as if he could ever understand, and she recaps that it's Will who has a problem with everybody else, including Amy, who he just met. She sarcastically thanks him for starting this fight at the height of such a stressful weekend when she thought that she would be able to rely on him, and storms out of the tent. But unable to locate her brother as time is running out, Love is approached by an apologetic Will, who offers to help by going to find 40. So she takes her place on the stage as the ceremony is about to begin, and when it comes time for Love's speech, she looks out at the crowd and sees her twin right at Will's side, which prompts her to go off book and speak to the depth and realness of her new love under the guise of talking about her parents. The magical moment is interrupted by 40 taking the stage to make a speech of his own, but instead causing a scene as Love realizes that he's high out of his mind. She pulls him away and hides him in a tent, leaving for a moment and returning to be greeted by her mother's contempt. Dottie scolds Love, saying that her failure to keep her brother safe disgusts her, and Love pauses as she looks to 40, who tries to dissuade her with his glance, but she calls her mother out as a hypocrite, knowing that she's the one who failed to keep her son safe. Dottie slaps her, and Love breathes through her rage as Will watches helplessly from across the tent. She storms out, and he follows her back to hers, sitting with Love and sharing that his dad hit him too. She asks why he didn't tell her sooner, but understands intuitively as he turns the question on her, and Love admits that she wanted to avoid polluting their relationship with the darkness of her life before him. To her relief, Will assures Love that he wants to know her, not just the cute parts but the dark parts too, insisting that he doesn't see it as a burden. She confesses that she's been holding back and opens up more about the au pair situation, explaining to Will that the woman, Sophia, actually abused 40, who is still misguided in his belief that she was his first love. Love looks away as she tells him that her parents caught the two together and as a result, they let the au pair go. She meets Will's gaze as she says that the woman was troubled and killed herself, and he doesn't even flinch at the dark revelation. Love continues, admitting that 40 found the body and her parents kept everything quiet with money, but her brother has never been the same. Having shown Will the reality of her parents, Love hopes that he understands why she prioritizes 40 so much and says that she's stuck with him, and Will corrects her that they're stuck with him, affirming to Love that they're reaching the next level of their relationship. She lies back in the bed and waits for Will to join her, growling at his neck with a wolf toy, playfully referencing the earlier encounter. He doesn't break his gaze, and Love sees his singular focus for her as he leans in to kiss her. She wants to tell him she loves him, and he responds by speaking it first, but remarks that it's such a complicated word. Will suggests that they could use another, and Love looks to the toy in her hand, offering up the phrase "I wolf you" to speak to the depth of being part of a pack. Will invokes the phrase at work a day later, embracing Love from behind while she's distracted doing inventory in the kitchen. She turns around to kiss him and proposes a break to hook up in the stockroom, but they're interrupted once again by her beloved brother 40. He addresses the fact that he'll have to make amends, but confirms that he's freshly sponsored and started attending meetings, so he plans to apologize when he gets to that step in the program. Love assures 40 that she's just glad he's okay, and he reiterates that he is, as he's been keeping busy prepping to adapt a new book that Amy found to inspire his script. He hands it over to Love with notes already sticking out, and she reads the summary on the back, describing it as a posthumous collection of poetry and prose from a young author named Guinevere Beck. 40 says that the main character really spoke to him as somebody who just wanted to be loved, and Love sighs in surprise as she reads the excerpts her brother has flagged. She gets distracted when he starts freaking out after checking his phone, and 40 announces that the police now suspect his friend Henderson was murdered. As if suicide wasn't triggering enough, murder will be even more of a challenge to 40's sobriety, and Love picks up on Amy's attempt to calm him down, rushing to comfort her brother before he spirals emotionally. A few days later, Love and Will accompany her brother to Henderson's funeral in hopes of providing enough emotional support to prevent another relapse. But 40 reveals that he isn't handling the situation very well after the service when he declares that he's going to bash in the brains of Henderson's killer. Concerned by his violent impulse, Love joins Amy in comforting 40. Amy recounts how she learned to live for the now after surviving an attack from her ex and encourages 40 to do the same. But as Love had learned the same lesson after what happened with James, 40 takes it too far as always and asks Amy to move in with him. Love tries to discourage her brother from making such a big decision while he's grieving, but he brushes her off again and breaks down in tears as he walks away with Amy trailing him. Will redirects her attention and Love finds her friend, spotting one of 7 totems that make someone an official Angelino, and Gabe attempts to explain the checklist to Will, but he seems uninterested. Love notices his eyes wander over to his property manager, who appears to be attending the funeral alone, so she takes advantage of Will being distracted and says that she has to head back to Anavrin. Since 40 insists on rushing into things with Amy, Love calls her family's private investigator to start looking into her, since she's still suspicious over the woman's slip-up at the weekend. The next day at work, Love invites Will for a romantic trip to Glendora for donuts that are so good they should be considered a sex crime, and he agrees to pick her up at 6. But 6 o'clock comes and goes, and Will misses their date without so much as a call to say that he's running late. So Love waits around at Anavrin, meeting P.I. Alec at 7 to find out what he's learned about Amy so far. She returns to the kitchen, baking through her frustration, when Will finally arrives looking terror-stricken to be in trouble with her. He barrages Love with an array of I'm sorries, and she tells him that she doesn't tolerate apology assault and he'll get to apologize on her terms. Will accepts this with patience and asks about the man he saw outside. Love explains how she hired someone to look into Amy, and Will gets weirdly defensive over it, asking if Love would ever hire someone to follow him. She's taken aback by his attitude and sarcastically asks if she should, but she considers that Will just doesn't understand, and she says that people take advantage of 40 because of their family's money, so she won't apologize for trying to protect her brother. But the tense moment with Will takes her back to a fight she had with James, and Love realizes that she's letting her family's wealth interfere with her relationship again, so she reconsiders Will's position and says that she'll call off the PI in the morning. The next day to Navrin, Love calls Alec to abandon the investigation, but he says that he found something she'll want to see, so he asks to meet up. When he arrives at the store, Love finds out that Amy lied about her name and where she's from, and that she broke into Will's apartment earlier in the day, unlocking a window like she planned to come back. So later that night, Love gets to the apartment first and waits for Amy to sneak in. She watches as the redhead climbs in the window, and Love confronts her at the table, revealing that the woman's real name is Candace Stone, and she's originally from New York, where she spent a few weeks in a mental hospital. Love accuses Candace of trying to con her family by dating 40, but Amy Candace reveals that she's actually in LA because of Will. She claims that Will isn't his name, but he's actually her ex-boyfriend, Joe Goldberg. She then insists that he tried to kill her, and he did kill the girl from the book that 40 is adapting, so she came to LA to protect Love. Candace tries to say that the most dangerous thing is to be loved by Will, and she pulls out a picture of the two of them as evidence of their relationship. But Love has sensed there was something wrong with Amy since she arrived. She considers that the woman must have read the book while she was having a breakdown in the mental hospital and formed a delusional fantasy about her own relationship. Love sees through Candace's plan of protecting her, knowing that it's just an excuse to sabotage her ex, and Love tells her that she isn't a damsel in distress in need of protecting. While Candace is caught off guard, Love lays out what's going to happen, explaining that Candace is going to leave the city and cease contact with her brother 40. She slides over an envelope with a check for Candace to get the psychiatric help that she needs, and Love warns that if she hears from Candace again, she won't be so understanding. The woman leaves, and Love waits at Will's apartment, baking a batch of cinnamon rolls to teach him a lesson about deception. He walks in the door, happy to see her, and she watches him, smiling mischievously as he takes a bite of a freshly frosted treat. When Will spits it back out, he tries to hide his disgust, but it's no use as Love admits to swapping out sugar for salt to make a point about how it sucks to be lied to in a way that Will might actually understand. She throws the Polaroid from Candace on the table and asks if what Candace said about him was true. He picks up the picture and admits that his real name is Joe Goldberg, but rejects the rest of the accusations. He goes on to confirm that Candace is crazy and her obsession with him and ruining his relationships is the reason that he had to leave New York. He says that he just wanted to be free, but then he met Love, which was completely unexpected, so he was terrified when Candace showed up with 40, but he didn't know how to tell her the truth. Love asks about the author who wrote the Dark-Faced Book of Poems, and he claims that they went on one date and she only posted a picture of them to make her real boyfriend jealous, but even that encounter forced him to flee the city as Candace was able to track him down from the photo. Love assures Will that she took care of Candace with money and threats, but she realizes that she doesn't even know if she should be calling him that. Will says that she can call him anything for any reason as long as she doesn't stop calling him, and Love recognizes his desire for her but needs the honesty in his actions to back it up. She tearfully admits that she's never loved anyone like Will before, but as she's learned that Joe has been holding back on her, Love tells him that it's over and leaves his apartment. She heads to a Navrin, remembering the day that James finally told her that he was sick after keeping it from her for 2 months to avoid the look on her face when he broke the bad news. Not wanting her relationship with Will to end the same way, she starts thinking about how to show Joe that he's safe to be himself with her. Love reaches out to 40 to tell him what happened, and she says that Joe doesn't need to leave, tasking her brother with delivering the news to see if Joe decides to stay in LA for her. When he does, Love believes that he deserves another chance, but knows that they can't move on until he fully opens up to her and she gets to know the real him. So she hires a new PI to look into Joe and find out what he gets up to when he thinks that she isn't looking. While she waits to hear back, Love settles in with Guinevere Beck's book and devours it cover to cover, fascinated by the story of a young woman pursued by somebody so determined to be with her they would kill anyone who got in their way. As a theory starts to form in her head, Love meets with the PI and learns that Joe has been visiting a Lock of Fame storage unit not far from a Navrin. During his next shift, she borrows the keys from his locker to see what Joe's been hiding and finds a spacious unit housing a clear glass cage and a box of mementos from the duration of their relationship. Love admires the craftsmanship of the structure and settles into the space to revisit the book in this new light. Doing so confirms her suspicions that the story's true romantic lead isn't the convicted therapist Dr. Nicky, but Joe himself, misguided into chasing after a mediocre writer and killing to prove how much he cares. Love realizes that Guinevere Beck must have rejected Joe, not appreciating what he did for her, and she likely threatened him, leaving him with no choice but to silence her and frame the therapist. Love reflects on the brilliance of Joe's plan and devises her own to try and lure out his real self to prove that she can accept him completely. In the following days, Love reconnects with James's best friend Milo for a rebound fling and flaunts him in front of Joe at a Navrin, waiting for the day that he disappears the man like the boyfriend in the book. One day, 40 confronts Love in the kitchen, comparing her to their mother and accusing her of not being interested in Milo. She tells him to focus on himself, but instead he starts focusing on Joe, setting him up on dating apps and posting pictures of him out with women just to get under Love's skin. She's momentarily distracted from her disappointment in Joe when Milo shows up to a Navrin with strawberry sex crime donuts, but biting into one takes Love right back to the missed date and apology assault from Will, and she notices Joe nearby as he's taking the trash to a dumpster. Milo announces that he's canceled his trip to Bali to stay in LA with Love and asks her to be his girlfriend. Wondering how much Joe overheard and if he's going to take the bait anytime soon, Love avoids the question but tells Milo that he should stay if it feels right. Back in the store, Love confronts Joe at the counter about the online dating that 40's been documenting, and when he has the audacity to say that it's going well, Love presses him on what name he's using to gauge how real he's being. When he admits that he's going by the name of Will, Love relaxes, knowing that he isn't being any more honest with someone else, but he still isn't being real with her, so she remarks an unimpressed interesting and returns to work. The next morning, Milo texts Love that he's going on a run, and she considers that Joe might take the opportunity to recreate the Central Park attack, where Beck's friend was attacked by a stalker. But Milo texts hours later to make plans, disappointing Love as she accepts and suggests that they meet in a Navrin. When Milo arrives, she enlists his help to sample cake flavors for her friend's upcoming wedding. He drops the bomb that he's falling for Love and assures her that he can wait if she's not feeling the same way yet, but Milo turns up the pressure when he says that he's moving nearby to be closer to her. The suffocation continues the following morning when Milo shows up unannounced with flowers and surprises Love in the kitchen. She accepts the gift with grace, knowing that Joe is watching from across the store, but it's 40's antagonizing of Milo that finally gets a reaction out of him. Love leaves the kitchen just in time to hear Milo insult 40 before punching him in the face. She runs to her brother, yelling at Milo to get out, but he blames 40 for starting the fight and accuses Love of paying too much attention to her brother to have even noticed that James was sick. Joe steps up to defend her against Milo and reiterates Love's order to get out. She watches as Milo challenges Joe, but he doesn't flinch, standing up for Love without resorting to violence. Milo storms out and Love confronts the boys in the break room. Joe apologizes and 40 follows suit, saying they both just love her too much. She looks to Joe to see if that's true, and he remains evasive, clearly trying to avoid his true feelings as he says that he has to leave for dinner plans with a friend. Love stops him on his way out, expressing her appreciation for standing up for her by addressing Joe with his real name, as she affirms that he is a good friend, the first successful step at getting the relationship back on the right track. The next morning at a Navrin, Love hosts Sunrise and Lucy for a cake testing and gets frustrated when they're too easygoing about the flavor. Lucy picks up on her mood and asks Love if she's upset about Milo, but she admits that she hasn't even thought about him since he left, and her mind has been completely preoccupied thinking about Will. As Love feels like she pushed away a good thing over something insignificant, Sunrise understands as the romantic of her relationship and suggests that Will might deserve a second chance, while Lucy protests, reminding Love that he lied to her. Love remarks that it's in her family's nature to cut their losses and move on, but Sunrise argues that Love isn't defined by her family, and if she wants to be with this guy, then she should just go get him. So Love decides that she's going to find a way to reconcile with Joe and checks 40's Instagram to see they were posting pictures together at a Navrin. But after her shift, Love returns to her work locker and finds a goodbye letter from Joe explaining that he's leaving town after all. Before she has time to panic, Dottie arrives to invite Love to dinner as she was advised by her shaman to make amends with her daughter. She says that she wants them to be friends and it's essential for both of them to grow, wrapping Love in an embrace. Knowing that her mother's go-to spot is the restaurant of the hotel where 40 mentioned he would be writing, Love agrees to dinner with her mother, if only for the opportunity to run into Joe. Dottie says they'll have fun with cocktails and start breaking down walls, but once they reach the main course, her ulterior motives are revealed. She prompts Love to take a selfie with her, confessing that Ray is having another affair and planning to post the photo to recapture his attention and remind him what an incredible family he has waiting for him at home. Love pushes back, knowing that her brother is a ticking time bomb and seeing the pain that Ray's cheating causes her mother even if she tries to hide it behind photos and filters, and Dottie just dismisses her, saying they all have a part to play. Love lashes out at her mother's passivity, reminding her of the sage smudge that she did over the au pair situation instead of doing anything real to protect 40. Dottie insists that she did what she had to do, while Love knows that she was the one who actually stepped up. Dottie says that she loves her family unconditionally, but Love rejects the lie, knowing what unconditional love feels like from just her short time with Joe, and storming out of the dining room to try and find him in the hotel. She runs into Joe in the hallway a few floors up and launches into her plea to convince him to stay. Love says that his letter shattered her emotionally and she asks if he's really leaving. He doesn't respond, but he doesn't deny it. She asks if they can at least have one last lunch together, looking to Joe hopefully, but eventually he shakes his head no. Not expecting Joe's denial and feeling sick from too many drinks at dinner, Love throws up on the floor and her mother appears to usher her away to rest on a couch back downstairs. Dottie strokes her daughter's hair as she apologizes for being so hard on her, but admits that it's only because she knows Love is the only other Quinn who can handle the truth. She tells Love that there's so much that she'll understand when she has a family of her own and leaves to reserve their suite for the night. As Love lays on the couch, she reflects on the suggestion of having kids of her own and a thought occurs to her. She composes herself and rushes to the store for a test, confirming that she's pregnant, and Love realizes that she needs to stop Joe from leaving without knowing that he's going to be a father. She returns to the hotel just in time to see him heading out with 40, and noticing that Joe appears to be sobbing and 40 is definitely staggering, Love trails them from a distance to supervise until they arrive at the storage unit. She watches as 40 hands Joe a flower and says something suggesting that he's about to hook up with Delilah, so Love follows him inside, thankfully disproving her fears as she waits in the hallway for not more than a couple minutes. When Joe stumbles out and walks right past her, she peeks in the unlocked unit to see what he's been up to and discovers Delilah at the table inside of the glass cage. As she takes in the scene, Love realizes that this must be what Joe's running from and considers that Candace might have gotten to Delilah, who started threatening to write an expose on Joe the same way that she did to 40's murdered friend Henderson. Love knows that a reporter like Delilah can't be paid off, and her blackmailing Joe means that she could always come back making more demands, so Love recognizes her chance to show Joe that she will do anything to protect their family. She searches the shelf as Delilah babbles incoherently, and Love approaches her in the cage with a knife behind her back, slashing her throat to silence her threats and ensure that her unborn daughter will grow up with the love and support of her father. Love looks up and backs away, unsure of what to do next as she didn't really plan ahead, and she leaves the storage unit just as she found it, returning to the hotel and situating herself on the couch to try and get through to Joe. She video calls him and he answers from a bathtub, indicating that he's back at the hotel and he apologizes for being weird earlier in the night. Joe says that he was just overwhelmed with saying goodbye, and Love refuses his goodbye, forgives his stupid lies, and tells Joe that she just wants to be with him. She asks if he wants a life with her too, and he says that he does, so Love assures him that they can handle whatever he's running from, knowing that they'll have to deal with the mess in the storage unit eventually. She asks if they can meet in the morning, and Joe says that he has something to tend to, but then he's all hers. Love hangs up and starts planning the story of what happened to Delilah and decides to use the backlash that she faced over her reporting as a way to cover for her disappearance. She arrives early the next morning and leaves an anonymous note on Delilah's front door before heading up to Joe's apartment. Love lets herself in, thinking that he left the door unlocked for her, but she second-guesses her assumption when he seems surprised to see her, as if he forgot about their plans. She wonders if she was so drunk that she made the whole thing up, but Joe reassures her that he remembers the greatest phone call of his life and kisses her, embracing affectionately until they're interrupted by 40's production assistant, Ellie, asking if they've seen her sister, Delilah. She hands over a letter with a death threat that she found on their apartment door, and Love suggests that it could be a response to the article that Delilah wrote and encourages Joe to turn it over to the police. Knowing that an underage Ellie shouldn't be in her apartment alone, Love offers to make her breakfast before they run an errand to go shopping at the market. When they return and start prepping for dinner, Love teaches Ellie how to properly chop vegetables and encourages her with positive reinforcement, prompting Ellie to open up about the struggle of losing her father, which subtly reassures Love that she made the right choice for her child. As they continue cooking, Love notices Ellie checking her phone periodically until she starts full-blown panicking. She tries to defuse the situation and convince the girl that everything will be okay, but Ellie screams that something must have happened to her sister since she's not texting back. She starts pushing things off counters and trashing the kitchen, so Love calls Joe to come back to the apartment as soon as possible. He returns and confronts Ellie in the kitchen, holding her tightly until she calms down in his arms, and Love watches from across the room, imagining Joe as a father comforting their own daughter when she reaches her teenage years. Ellie asks Joe what's wrong with her that made Delilah leave, and he sympathetically reassures her that it isn't her fault, hugging her protectively as Love looks on, more in love with him than ever, seeing how patient and paternal he can be. Joe walks Ellie home to rest, and Love tries to resume dinner, but after a while, she's interrupted by a call from Candace saying that she has evidence against Joe and giving Love the address to the storage unit. Love rushes to meet her, considering how she could convince Candace to forget what she found in the cage and leave like she did before, but when she arrives, she finds that Candace has actually trapped Joe in the cage with the dead body. Love demands that Candace let him out, but the woman asserts that Joe will be in a cage for the rest of his life. Love can't stand the attitude in her voice, thinking she knows anything about what happened when Candace is just as delusional about Joe as Guinevere Beck was, so Love pulls out her phone to call her mom and intercept the police response before word spreads. Candace tells Love to go ahead and call the cops, indicating that she hasn't actually called anyone yet, and Love realizes there may be a better way to save her family, one that doesn't pollute their fresh start with Quinn family blood money. She yells at Candace, telling her that she's crazy, and then she turns to Joe, pleading with him to admit that he didn't kill Delilah, but Joe throws her a curveball when he claims that he did. Taking the blame for what Love did, he says that he previously attacked Candace and lied about it because he thought he was doing it for Love, but he looks to Love and meets her gaze to tell her that he was wrong because he didn't know real love until he met her. He says that he just wanted to be good enough for her, confirming what she had suspected about his hesitancy, but Delilah found out that he's the one who killed Henderson, so he must have killed her in the night. Overwhelmed by Joe's confession and her early morning sickness, Love rushes out of the storage unit to find a garbage can in the hallway. As she throws up and tries to figure out how to save her happily ever after, Candace comes up behind her and starts grabbing at her back. As it turns out that Joe was right and they can't move on until his vengeful ex is gone for good, Love begs her to go away, but Candace won't listen or keep her hands to herself, so Love uses a broken bottle from the trash can to stop her the same way she dealt with Delilah, protecting her family by putting an end to the redhead's vendetta against Joe. Love uses the mat on the floor to cover the body and store it in the trunk of her car, a task more physically demanding than she anticipated. When she returns to the storage unit, lowering the door behind her, she relaxes on the floor outside of Joe in the cage. Love picks up a key that he must have dropped from inside, a sign that Joe has accepted his fate to take the blame for the body in the cage. He looks up at her, seemingly surprised that she returned to him, and Joe asks what happened to Candace, and Love tells him that she took care of it, assuring him that they can be together as she fingers the key in her hand. Joe's surprise turns to distress as he tells Love that he doesn't think that they can, believing that he's broken her. They lock eyes, and Joe affirms to Love that this isn't her fault, claiming that he killed Delilah. Love finally has the opportunity to explain what really happened the night that she found Delilah in the cage, but first, she reveals the full backstory of the au pair. Love explains that the older woman got 40 hooked on drugs in order to take advantage of him, while her parents neglected to do anything about the abuse, leaving Love to handle the situation herself. So she knocked 40 unconscious to take action and kill the abusive woman, leaving the knife in her brother's hand, knowing that her mother wouldn't hesitate to cover for her son. Love admits that she followed Joe to the storage unit and found Delilah inside, knowing instinctively what she had to do as she had recognized the darkness in Joe after previously discovering the cage and understanding who he really was from her read of the dark face of Love. Despite the insights from her story, Love accuses Guinevere Beck of being unspecial, mediocre, and undeserving of the real Joe since she couldn't offer him the unconditional acceptance that Love can. She tells him that they're soulmates and she's not broken but protecting him because it's what she wants to do. Joe sits in silence, processing the scene until he looks to Love and asks her about Ellie. She lays out her plan to temporarily frame Ellie for Henderson's murder while arming her with the Quinn family lawyers to get the ridiculous case dismissed and tainted to avoid suspicion ever catching up to Joe. Love explains how this will set up Ellie with fame and settlement money to launch her film career, and then allow them to leave Delilah's body to be found with a suicide note so she'll become a posthumous feminist icon for taking down her abuser. Joe dismisses Love's plan for the emotional impact of leaving Ellie to think that her sister killed herself, but he doesn't offer any better ideas. Instead, he accuses her of spewing a river of crazy, and Love calls him out as the last person that she thought would be hysterical in their situation. He turns it back on her, accusing Love of killing Delilah, and she reminds him that she only had to do that because he killed an actual celebrity, while he was too busy chasing some fantasy version of her instead of appreciating the real woman standing right in front of him. Joe can't admit that she's right, so Love leaves him in the cage for some time to think and returns to Anavrin to put the final touches on Sunrise and Lucy's wedding cake. When she returns to her car, she checks Candace's phone to find messages from 40 confirming her crazy story about Joe and claiming that he needs to warn Love. She starts to consider how she'll explain things to her brother as he continues frantically begging Candace to call him. Love returns to the storage unit with fresh muffins for Joe to remind him of the early days when she'd leave him something sweet in his locker. This prompts Joe to recall that he had never had a muffin until he moved into a state-run group home because his mother had always insisted that they were basically cake. Love laughs and admits that his mother was right, asking if she's still around. Joe avoids the question, saying instead that she was a saint and she did the best that she could, but he was a handful. Joe grabs a muffin to take a bite, but stops abruptly and looks to Love. She's confused until she realizes that he must think the muffin is poisoned, so she grabs one and takes a bite herself to prove him wrong. Starting to lose hope in their future as it appears that Joe really believes she's crazy, he says that's not the case and he just can't eat so close to a dead body. He asks Love to trust him long enough to open the cage so that he can move the corpse out and assures Love that he trusts her. She grabs the keys from her bag to meet him in the cage, but as Love opens the door, she sees the reflection of a weapon behind Joe's back and he grabs her, holding her against the wall with a pair of handcuffs to her throat as she yells out that she's pregnant. Joe stops dead in his tracks, letting his hand fall and staring at Love as she reiterates the news. He backs away and drops the handcuffs and Love pleads with him to say something. She asks if he really believes that she ever wanted to hurt anyone and admits that she hated what she did to Delilah, but she couldn't let it destroy their baby's life. Love breaks down and confesses that she does whatever it takes to protect the people that she loves, pointing out that they both had to learn how to fend for themselves so young. She tells Joe that she protected him because she loves him and had to convince herself that he would forgive her in order to go through with it. But she can see that he hates her now and Love slips out of the cage, telling Joe if he wants to run or call the cops or hurt her, then he should just do it. Instead of leaving, Joe kneels in the doorway and declares that real love doesn't evaporate when things get hard. He assures Love that he will do whatever it takes to earn back her trust because nothing is more important than their family. Love asks Joe if he still wants to go to her friend's wedding and they get cleaned up, arriving to the venue just in time for Love to do a final check on the wedding cake. After the ceremony, she turns on her phone to find a barrage of text messages from 40, so they head to a Navran to try and contain him. Love meets 40 first and attempts to talk him down, calling out how he can't even finish his sentence, but 40 insists that he's sober and trying to save her. So Love asks him to walk her through his plan, and 40 explains that he met with the therapist convicted of murdering Beck and confirmed that Candace was right about Joe, but Love reminds him that Candace was crazy. 40 claims that Joe is a bloodthirsty wolf in Love's blind spot right as he enters the store from the back room. Love tries to send Joe back outside, but 40 insists that he stay and threatens to get him sent to prison. He accuses Joe of being a stalker and a killer who fixated on his sister, but Joe promises 40 that he would never hurt Love. 40 says that he'll never get the chance as he pulls out a gun and points it at Joe. Love tries to calm her brother down, but it doesn't work, so she tells 40 that she'll never forgive him if he kills Joe and that he'll never see her again or ever meet his niece. 40 recoils, shaming Love for bringing a child into their world and telling her that she's broken and crazy if she thinks that she'd be a good mother. Love tries to dismiss her brother lashing out, but he alludes to knowing that she really killed Sophia and framed him, blaming her for the secret eating away at him ever since. Having crushed his sister's heart, 40 turns his attention back to Joe and orders him to get on his knees, putting the gun to his head. Love watches helplessly as Joe closes his eyes and a gunshot rings out, knocking him back on the floor. But when she sees Joe open his eyes, Love realizes that it was 40 who was shot by some random cop who unexpectedly entered the scene at a Navran. Love falls to the floor next to 40, sobbing over his body as she looks to Joe. He rushes over and pulls Love into his arms, holding her as she cries over the death of the brother that she had tried so hard to protect her whole life. In the days following the shooting, Love has to put her own pain on hold as she tries to manage her mother through the planning of 40's funeral. They're interrupted by the police, who have started to investigate 40 in connection with Henderson's murder, but Dottie covers for her son as she always has. But on the day of the funeral, Ray has Dottie served with divorce papers as if he already had them prepared, waiting for the opportunity to abandon his family, and Love is saddled with her perpetually wine-drunk mother, knowing that she can't cut her off as it would make her no better than her father. Still, she tries to remain focused on her relationship with Joe and proposes that they spontaneously drive to the courthouse to get married, allowing the moment to exist just for them. They start house hunting for their forever home and settle down in the safe suburb of Madre Linda, which is known for its excellent schools. Dottie buys her own condo a short drive away, and after months of preparation, the family welcomes their new baby as Love gives birth to a healthy little boy. Despite planning for a daughter, Love pivots and quickly thinks of a name for a boy, announcing that he will officially be named Henry, but affectionately nicknamed 40. The next 6 months flash by in a blur, a compilation of day-to-day childcare duties necessary to keep a little human alive. Love's mother makes regular appearances, offering to help with baby 40 in exchange for a few pictures to post on her feed. The first time the new parents venture out with Henry, he starts crying in the coffee shop, which draws the attention of local momfluencer and blogger Sherry Conrad. Love internally rolls her eyes through the whole interaction, smiling and responding minimally as necessary since Sherry already seems to know everything. The woman remarks on how long it's taken them to meet, and Love agrees, knowing that she's been actively avoiding this moment, and Sherry says that they'll have to grab coffee sometime so she can share all of her momhood secrets, the condescension lingering in the air after she leaves. The couple head home and Love waves to their new neighbor Natalie before venting in the kitchen about how the Anglers haven't given them a housewarming gift, and she wonders what the woman's problem is. Joe agrees that something seems off with her and recognizes that Love could use some rest, so he volunteers to take care of Henry. But as soon as Joe picks him up, he starts crying and Love snatches him away. Frustrated with Joe's inability to connect with their child, she warns him that babies can tell when your heart's not in it and heads upstairs to put Henry down for a nap. While he sleeps, Love scrolls through Sherry's blog Heart-Shaped Mistakes, and Joe calls from the kitchen that he's heading out on another diaper run. The next morning, Love gets winded going up the stairs, so she finds Joe to hand off Henry and get herself to a workout class, where she conveniently ends up running into Sherry and her friends. As Kiki and Andrew join in on making comments about Love's baby weight, she suggests that it sounds like everyone is calling her fat, but Sherry brushes it off like that wouldn't even be an insult, and she invites Love to join them for coffee. Love sees her chance to put Sherry in her place when she asks the name of her blog as if she's never even heard of it, but Sherry responds by asking Love what she does for work. She explains that she's trained as a chef, but admits that she hasn't had any time for that since Henry was born. Andrew affirms that Love's only job right now is to connect with her family, which prompts Sherry to pry into Love's sex life, suggesting its adequacy could affect her breast milk. Love assures her there's no issues on that front before returning home to try and initiate an intimate moment with Joe, but getting met with disinterest. More invested in his library book than his beautiful wife, Love pulls away and asks why he won't talk to her, accusing Joe of being distracted from their family. Before he can answer, Henry starts crying upstairs and Love decides that she's going to take him to her mother's for the night. She packs a bag and drives to Dottie's condo, only to realize that she doesn't want to see her mom when she already feels like shit about herself, so she gets ice cream and returns home instead. Love finds Joe in the kitchen and notices that he looks flushed. He says that he had a drink with their neighbor Natalie and confirms that she's crazy. Love apologizes for leaving so impulsively and Joe pulls her in for a kiss, telling her that he was thinking about their vows and how generous she is, while he's been acting like an asshole in the midst of everything being so crazy. Love feels reaffirmed in their family as the pair race upstairs and have sex in the hallway, unable to make it to the bedroom in the heat of their reignited passion. A few days later, Love and Joe prepare for an upcoming party by poring over the social media of everyone that they've met in Madre Linda to gather the necessary intel on their neighbors. The following night, they arrive at the Conrads where they're greeted by Sherry, who immediately hands off the pie that Love brought her. The pair linger on their own, scoping out their pairs together until Love is pulled away by Sherry, leaving Joe to chat with her husband, Carrie. The girls join Kiki and Andrew to gossip, and they remark on the arrival of Matthew and Natalie Engler. Andrew praises her appearance, but Kiki reminds him that Natalie is a bad person and explains to Love that Matthew cheated on his first wife Mimi and left her for Natalie. They admit that it wouldn't be very feminist to say that Natalie stole a man, but the news leaves Love concerned over what really happened when Joe had drinks with the homewrecker next door. But as she heads inside to make herself a plate of appetizers, Love overhears Sherry bad-mouthing her family in the butler's pantry, and Natalie comes to her rescue, offering Love more wine and some guidance on navigating the social sphere of Madre Linda, so maybe Natalie's not so bad. She encourages Love to make friends and tolerate Sherry because she basically runs the entire town, and if she can't be friends with Sherry, then Love needs to earn her respect by being her authentic self. Love admits that she doesn't know how much of that she has left after becoming a stay-at-home mom, and Natalie asks Love what she would do if she could do anything she wanted. She says that she's been dreaming of opening a bakery, and Natalie the realtor knows the perfect space, giving Love her card to set up a showing. Love appreciates the ability to have a real conversation with her neighbor, and Natalie remarks on how crazy it is that they haven't had Love or Joe over to the house yet. Knowing that Joe has ventured next door and reconsidering what must have happened if Natalie feels the need to cover for it, Love doesn't reveal her suspicions until the walk home when she confronts Joe and accuses him of sleeping with their neighbor. He denies the allegation, admitting that he liked how she flirted with him and criticizes Love for trying to police his mind. But she knows how Joe gets fixated on women and asks if he's obsessed with Natalie. Joe insists emphatically that it's not like that, and he reminds Love that he moved to the suburban hell for her and Henry's future, confessing that he's just worried he's going to screw up their son. Remembering what Forty had said just before he died, Love understands Joe's fears about failing as a parent and admits that she wanted to move here to be safe and start fresh and never have to do anything bad ever again. Joe assures her that they don't have to and that she has been a great mother. So Love tells Joe that there's still time to bond with Henry, but suggests reading him something besides The Great Gatsby, and they head home to relieve Dottie of her babysitting duty. The next morning, when Joe takes Henry to the library for something more age-appropriate, Love visits the storage room to retrieve her baking supplies, and she finds a loose air vent hiding a shoebox inside. A familiar box, Love opens it to discover mementos of Joe's affair with the backstabbing, man-stealing Natalie. Love calls her up to sort things out at the bakery, asking to meet for a showing while planning to nip the problem in the bud before things get too out of hand. She asks to see the basement, and with an axe that she finds in the hallway, Love kills Natalie to save her family. And then she calls Joe to suggest that they start going to therapy before requesting that he come meet her at the bakery. Joe arrives and Love confronts him over the shoebox with Natalie's stolen belongings. He insists that nothing happened and starts checking Natalie's pockets for her phone, berating Love for not considering that it could be traced. She shoots back that she didn't plan every detail like a psychopath, but reveals that she did sign a lease for the bakery to give herself an alibi and allow them more time to take care of the mess. Joe stresses out and yells that there isn't any time, and Love argues that he backed her into a corner before comforting Henry, who has started crying across the room. Joe decides that they need a story for Natalie's disappearance and considers that they could bury her body in the woods, but Love reminds him of how well that worked out with Candace. He tries to ask Love how she handled Candace's body, but she tells him that it's safer if he doesn't know. So Joe recalls how he killed a man in LA and broke him down into pieces at a Navrin before putting him through the meat grinder. Love momentarily spirals as she realizes how often she used that machine, but Joe interrupts and accuses her of putting their family in danger by killing Natalie. Henry starts crying again, and Love leaves Joe to clean up the mess caused by his cheating, snapping at him that he cared more about Natalie than his family anyway. She returns home and ignores her mother's calls all morning until Dottie shows up at the house. Love tells her about signing a lease for the bakery, and Dottie warns her that she can't help out financially after only vaguely mentioning that the family finances were in flux. Confident that she'll find a way to make it work, Love heads to the store to stock up on supplies and gets noticed by a college kid who helps her with her groceries. He flirts with her, which makes Love feel seen but guilty for enjoying the attention from a random guy when she really wants the affection to come from her husband. So they start attending couples therapy, and during their first session, Love immediately admits that she caught Joe having an affair, which led to a fight. He tries to deny it based on a technicality, but Love knows him well enough to interpret his stalking as a sign of infidelity. Their therapist, Dr. Chandra, asks about their life as new parents. Love looks to Joe as he lies and says that it's great. She says that he's been checked out and going through the motions, and she doesn't know where they go from here. Dr. Chandra pushes back, encouraging Love to speak only for herself to allow both partners room for their individual experience and avoid mistaking codependence for love. She digs into their feelings after the fight, starting with Joe. He claims that nothing was going to happen with the other woman, but he felt forced to get rid of her by Love, which made him think about leaving her. Love interjects, asking if he's insane, but her therapist directs her to listen and respond rather than impulsively react. Love asks why everyone considers her impulsive. Dr. Chandra questions who everyone entails, and they unpack Love's earlier interaction with her mother and her following encounter with the college boy. Joe appears off-put by her confession to craving his attention, and the therapist returns to his desire to run away, asking why he didn't. Joe explains that he stayed for Henry, but she argues that children are not enough to keep a marriage together. Dr. Chandra tells the couple that she only hears them fighting to be right when they need to be fighting for their relationship. With the first session finished, Love feels like they made a good start towards progress, and the next day she tries to decide what to bake for an upcoming party. Joe asks if they're still going to that, and Love sarcastically questions if he has some packing and running to do, but Joe is not amused. She resets and pulls out their how to talk homework from therapy, suggesting that Joe is saying that he wants them to be the only ones besides Natalie that don't show. He responds by not responding, leaving Love for some time alone to bake while he takes Henry to run errands until it's time to leave for the party. They show up early, worried that they're late, and Love joins the wives in the dessert room. She announces that she's going to be opening a bakery and asks the group to be her guinea pigs, offering for them to try her lemon raspberry cupcakes, knowing that it was the flavor of Sherry's wedding cake. But Sherry claims that she doesn't like lemon or raspberry, and Andrew and Kiki follow her lead, making excuses to avoid having a cupcake before leaving Love alone. Later on their way home from the party, Joe tells Love about a tracker ring that Natalie could have been wearing that would share her location with her husband and might indicate when her heart stopped. They drive out to the woods where Joe buried the body to dig it up and retrieve the ring. When he rips open the plastic wrapping, Love is horrified at the sight of the woman without her teeth. She asks what he did to them to ensure that she doesn't find them hidden somewhere at home, and he snarks that it's safer if she doesn't know. Joe has to break Natalie's finger to extract the ring, and they find that it's been cracked but decide to move the body just in case. Love leaves the ring in a rest stop bathroom, and they relocate the corpse to a construction site where the crew will be pouring a new foundation in the morning. As Love realizes how quickly Joe pivoted, she can't help but outright question how he knew that he would need another place to dispose of a body. Joe explains that he looked into the site as a backup plan after driving by the previous day, but Love asks how he got rid of Natalie so fast in the first place, questioning what else he was planning for, but he avoids giving an answer. She demands to know why he doesn't love her anymore and calls him out for almost killing her when she trusted him and entered the cage, only stopping when she screamed that she was pregnant and then moving on and acting like it never even happened. Love says that Henry's the only reason that she's alive, and it makes her feel like she can't trust her husband, but Joe argues that he can't trust her either because any lapse in his attention leads to her killing people. Love ends their fight on the accusation that not being enough for him will lead to Joe killing her, and they unpack it all in their next therapy session, where Dr. Chandra reassures them that neither one is going to kill their spouse. She remarks on their passion in fighting for their lives and recognizes the fear that motivates them both. Joe admits that he worries someone seeing the real him will make them go away, and Love confesses her own anxiety that anyone witnessing how ugly she could be would cause them to leave. Uncovering their shared fear of abandonment grants Love a sense of relief, and they're encouraged to see themselves as teammates fighting for the same thing. Dr. Chandra ends the session claiming that sex between teammates is practically primal as it's fueled by the deepest trust, and Love looks forward to reaching that level with Joe. That night at home, he reassures Love that he's all in on them, and they put Henry to bed together before discovering the primal truth for themselves. After the most passionate sex they've had since having a baby, Love declares that she would kill for Joe, and he says that he would kill for her and Henry too. Love is thankful to be back on the same page after the Natalie disruption, and Joe seems to be taking therapy to heart, as he suggests that they create a safe space that allows them to respond rather than impulsively react, so they spend the next few days rebuilding the glass cage in the basement of the bakery. Love stocks it as a proving room, secretly hiding a key for herself in a container of ingredients just in case, and prepares for her grand opening. Once the renovations are finished and the furniture has arrived, Love opens the bakery and spends her day watching potential customers pass her by. When she spots Sherry through the window, Love waves to her but deflates as the gesture goes unnoticed, and she wastes out the clock until she can close up shop and return home. But when she does, Love stresses out over not knowing what Matthew is thinking about his wife's disappearance, watching out of the window before taking a tray of cupcakes next door to see what she can find out. Love is greeted by the college boy at the front door and learns that he's actually Matthew's stepson, Theo. Matthew shows up and he's short with Love, saying that they're dealing with something and ushering Theo back into the house. Love returns home to tell Joe that Matthew definitely knows about Natalie, and they watch out the window together as police cars pull up to the Anglers. The next morning, 2 detectives arrive to question Love and Joe about Natalie, but they confess that they haven't had much time for socializing since having a baby. Love mentions that Natalie helped her lease the bakery, but besides that, she says that they don't really know their neighbors. Over the next few days, the news of Natalie's disappearance spreads, bringing new reporters every morning as Love watches anxiously out the window. She asks Joe how he can be so calm, admitting how scared she is, and he reassures her that he won't let anything bad happen to their family. Just then, they hear a commotion outside, and Love turns on the TV to see news crews harassing Matthew as he tends to a broken sprinkler. They shove their mics in his face and he refuses to give a comment, threatening them to get off his property. Love thinks that it's strange for Matthew to be acting so guilty, but considers that it could be good for them if he went down for Natalie's murder. Joe argues that it's better if the body is never found and everybody assumes that she ran off, so Love asks what they do until then. He says that they'll just act normal and take care of Henry, and then Joe promises that he will keep them safe. Love is comforted by his renewed dedication to their family, and she awaits the arrival of her mother, coming to babysit 40. When he starts fussing before she leaves, Love worries that her infant feels warm, but Dottie dismisses her concern, insisting that she's just nervous and projecting her anxiety onto her son. She takes the baby from Love, who heads to open the store, greeting Sherry and her friends with a smile as they walk through the door. Sherry explains that they're starting a search committee for Natalie and asks Love if she had mentioned anything about wanting to run away or being afraid of her husband Matthew. Love denies that she had and questions if their search is premature. Andrew claims that it's only a matter of time, and Sherry asks if Love ever heard the Anglers fighting. Not wanting to associate herself with Natalie, Love says that she barely knew the couple besides being neighbors and the realtor showing her the store. Sherry sympathizes with how hard the situation must be for Love, who seizes on the opportunity, saying that the only thing she can do to feel normal is come to the bakery. She pulls out a tray of scones and holds them out to the group, prompting Sherry to buy one, and she accepts, with Kiki and Andrew following suit. Love rides the pride of making her for sale and a better impression on Sherry until she turns on the news to see her making accusations about Matthew and announcing that Love was the last one to see Natalie alive the morning of her disappearance. She starts calling Joe, but he doesn't answer, so Love frantically texts him, internally freaking out, until Theo walks in recording the video and she demands that he knock it off and delete it. Love claims that she's having a bad hair day, but he disagrees, saying that it looks good to him. She tells the boy to stop flirting with her, and he agrees but continues to charm his way into a free cupcake by recounting his escape from the reporter surrounding his home. Love takes pity on him, offering Theo the choice between 2 different flavors, and he chooses carrot. She feels sentimental, explaining that was her first recipe and actually her brother's favorite. Love remembers how she baked them for 40 when he returned to her after a relapse, and Theo takes a bite, smiling at Love in approval. She asks if he has anybody to talk to, and when he hesitates to answer, they're interrupted by Love's phone as Dottie calls from the hospital. She explains that Henry developed a fever and Love needs to come meet her, and Love hangs up, thinking of everything she needs to do to close the store, when Theo offers to handle it all, and she leaves him with the key in the drawer and rushes to be with her baby. Love calls Joe on her way to the hospital, and they arrive to find that Henry has contracted the measles. The nurse confirms that everyone has been vaccinated and tells Love that she'll have to notify everyone that Henry has been in contact with. She situates herself in the hallway to start making calls, and after she reaches out to Margaret Brigham, Love gets an incoming call from Sherry, who has somehow already heard about Henry. She tells Love that she doesn't need to be embarrassed and offers to spread the news for her, but Love asserts that it's important she do it herself and hangs up on Sherry. When she's finished her list of calls, Love runs into Dottie, who informs her that she's buying a vineyard with the money that was due in flux to help with the bakery. Her mother's attitude forces Love to realize that she's been chasing Sherry's shallow approval because she's recreating her dynamic with Dottie, who dismisses her feelings, so Love tells her to leave, claiming that she moved to Madre Linda for a fresh start, but Dottie followed her and brought all of her toxicity. Dottie says that Love has too much anger in her and it's not healthy, but she knows that her mother's denial and alcohol dependency are far worse, and Love returns to Henry's room where Joe's waiting by his crib. She enters just in time to see the latest update from reporter Ryan Goodwin broadcasting from outside the bakery. Love panics and looks to Joe, telling him that acting normal isn't working, and he admits that they can frame Matthew as everybody already suspects him. She sends him home to take care of it and stays at the hospital with Henry. When she's taking a walk in the hallway, Love runs into Theo, who comes bearing tacos, and he asks how the baby is doing. At first, she lies that he's fine, but breaks down and confesses that he's not. Theo hugs Love and says that he locked up the store but had to leave when the news crews arrived. She asks when he's going back to school, and Theo explains that he's planning to stay until they find Natalie. He offers his unpaid assistance at the bakery, looking for any chance to get away from his dad, who has become completely closed off. Love recognizes the way that Theo feels disconnected from his own unavailable father and starts feeling guilty over the thought of distancing them further, but she's pulled away by a nurse and brought back to Henry's room where his fever has started to break. They monitor him for a few hours until he's released, and Love returns home to find Joe suffering from the measles himself. He reveals that he didn't plant the scarf, and having had doubts of her own, Love agrees that it wouldn't be right to send an innocent man to prison. She insists that they're better than that, and they burn the scarf in the sink as a goodbye to let go of Natalie and maintain the integrity of their family. The following night, the couple attend Natalie's vigil from their front yard as Love wonders if Matthew is going to make an appearance. They watch as Sherry and Kiki take pictures with bouquets of flowers, and the news reporters start to pack up. Just then, Matthew comes out of the house accompanied by Theo and makes a statement thanking everyone for attending the vigil, and he pleads with Natalie through the cameras to come home. A few days later, Love is reading up on anti-vaxxers at the bakery when Gil Brigham comes in to buy a half-dozen blueberry muffins. He remarks that his daughters had the measles as well, burying the lead that they were the ones to infect and almost kill baby Henry. Love remains calm and maintains her composure, running Gil's credit card as if money could make up for poisoning her child, as she slides his order across the counter without a word. He turns around to leave, and Love calls from behind him, knocking Gil out with a rolling pin and relocating him to the cage in the basement to give her time to consult her husband and decide how they're going to handle the man. She calls Joe and he arrives at the bakery, sending Love home to try and talk to Gil alone once he wakes up. Joe repurposes the baby monitor as a surveillance camera so Love can watch from home as he attempts to make a deal with Gil, but ultimately leaves him locked in the cage. Joe returns home to tell Love that he doesn't believe Gil can be trusted and he would go straight to the police, so she asks him what they should do now. He suggests that they could threaten Gil into silence with blackmail, saying that mutually assured destruction had worked out for him once before. Love heads back to the bakery where she's visited by Sherry, who puts up a missing poster and leaves without buying anything. As her anxiety gets the better of her, Love calls Joe for reassurance and he tells her that it's going to be okay and they can keep up appearances by volunteering for Sherry's search party. When Love returns home that afternoon, she overhears Theo yelling at Matthew that he can't be forced to volunteer, and his father dismisses him, refusing to talk to him while he's being emotional and taking his laptop inside. Love calls to Theo through a split in the fence, telling him that he sounded like a brat, and he quips back, asking if she was spying on him. She encourages him to attend the search so that it doesn't make his dad look bad, but offers to be his buddy, knowing that somebody needs to look out for the kid. Later that night, Joe returns home with the bad news that Gil is too clean to blackmail. Love starts to worry that the bakery could be searched in connection with Natalie's disappearance and suggests that they need to get rid of Gil, but Joe yells that she's not making him kill anyone because they aren't doing that to their son. He storms off, and Love realizes that Joe is right about another murder posing a risk to them and their son, so she decides that she'll have to find her own blackmail on Gil. The next morning, as she helps her mother pack a bag for her day with 40, she asks for the number of her father's old PI, lying as she says that she wants to check out the guy she runs the bakery from. Love holds off on looping in Joe until dinner, and he's not happy that she involved her family, but she explains that she didn't tell Dottie any details, and she wants to handle things the right way like he does, keeping their hands clean for their son. Love says that she knows how hard Joe is trying to be a good dad and that he's worried about the impact he has on Henry, and she reassures him that she's trying to fix things because she loves him. After dinner, Love gets a call from the PI who sends over documents that appear to show that Gil was paying a bribe to get his son Alan into college. So the couple confront Gil in the cage with their evidence, and he denies their accusations, insisting that his son is a star student who earned his spot at school. Love shows him proof of a donation to a non-existent charity and a payoff to another student's family, and Gil's genuine confusion leads Joe to piece together a more sinister explanation. He suggests that Alan may have assaulted a female classmate, prompting his mother to pay hush money to her family. Love is disgusted at the revelation and they leave Gil to stew for a few hours, but upon checking the camera after dinner, Love and Joe rush back to the basement after finding that Gil has hanged himself. They pull him down and Joe sits in a stunned silence in the cage until Love reminds him that they were going to keep their promise and Gil didn't have to do this to himself. Just then, she gets a text from Theo saying that he's on his way to the search, which inspires Love with the idea to frame Gil for the missing woman's murder and be done with the whole mess altogether. She retrieves the axe and plants Gil's fingerprints on the handle, packing it to take with her. While everybody is busy with the search, Love instructs Joe to set the scene of Gil's suicide with a confession to having an affair with Natalie before killing her. She heads to the woods to meet up with Theo and they stick flags in the ground as they walk. Love lies about having to pee so she can sneak off alone and plant the weapon to be found by a volunteer. When she returns to the path in search of Theo, she finds him going off on Sherry and tells him to calm down. Love checks in on Sherry first, covering for Theo and making him apologize to avoid causing more trouble for him and his father. He throws down his flags and storms off, avoiding Love for the rest of the day, but she offers him a ride home before it starts raining and they hang out at the bakery. Theo admits that it's hard to stay mad at the one person that he can stand talking to, and he asks how Love dealt with all of the attention from the news about her brother. She recalls the little details about him that mattered and says that he was the one person who really knew her. Love warns Theo that publicity flattens the people you care about, but she turns away before getting too vulnerable, starting to mix some muffin batter as Theo joins beside her to help. Afterward, they sit and talk about surviving their family tragedies. Theo wonders if the trauma of the ordeal makes you more fuckable, and Love admits that it does, but you start to resent the people who think that being with you will make them more interesting. She encourages Theo to find his people, regretting that 40 never really did, and he asks how to know who those people are. Love tells him that you just know and looks at Theo with a reassuring smile. He misreads her intent and leans in, kissing her unexpectedly, so Love hesitates before pulling away and she warns him not to do that again as she gets up to clear the table. When she turns back, Theo gets a text and says that the search might have turned up a murder weapon. She sends him home for the night and returns to Joe, anxiously awaiting the news of the following morning. After police officially announce the conclusion of the Angler investigation and the news spreads about Gil and Natalie's affair, Love feels relieved and free as she steps outside where she finds a flower arrangement from Sherry as a thank you for consoling her during the search. She looks up to see Theo loading into his truck to seemingly head back to college, and Love waves goodbye as she's ready to return to her happy suburban dream without any extramarital drama. With the whole Natalie affair behind them, the next few months are a breeze for the young couple as Love feels like she and her husband are back on the same page. But when Theo starts sending her drunken late-night emails, Love suspects that Joe would get upset if he knew what the kid was saying, so she demands that he knock it off. Knowing that Matthew isn't looking out for his son, Love compromises and pays for Theo's safe ride home when he reaches out because he's too drunk to drive, but she refuses to engage any further as she remains committed to her marriage. On the 6-month anniversary of starting therapy, Love feels ready to end their sessions as she recognizes the improvement in their communication and her own successful integration into the community. Dr. Chandra questions where Joe stands and he boasts about Love's business at the bakery and his newfound obsession with lawn care, but Love admits to their therapist that her husband is having more trouble fitting in socially. Emphasizing the importance of having trusted friends outside of a marriage, Dr. Chandra encourages Joe to make friends of his own and asks about the couple's sex life. Love lies and says that it's been great even though Joe hasn't been able to perform. Having successfully completed couples therapy, Love believes they're set for smooth sailing when she starts party prep for Henry's first birthday. With the help of her new BFF Sherry, Love poses for a photo shoot with Joe and Henry for a picture of their happy little family to use on the event's invitations. When Love expresses doubt over the theme, Joe reassures her that they're doing everything right, and Love glows as she's comforted by his confidence, so Sherry pulls her away for a few single shots. Joe and Henry rejoin her, and Sherry gets startled when music starts blasting next door. Love remarks that Theo must be home from college and thinks back to their kiss in the bakery, but redirects her affection to Joe, and Sherry snaps the perfect shot for their invitations. The next day, the Quinns host the Conrads for dinner, and Love and Sherry gossip over a glass of wine in the kitchen, with Sherry sneering when she sees Theo outside. Love tops off her wine, and Sherry spills that she heard Theo showed up to a midterm drunk and had to leave school because he's on academic probation. She claims that he was arrested in high school and already has 2 DUIs, concluding unsympathetically that Theo's determined to self-destruct and wind up dead in a ditch. Love is taken aback at Sherry's attitude towards Theo and suggests that he's just a good kid going through a tough situation, and Sherry softens her tone, agreeing with Love that maybe he just needs some better influences. Love starts to wonder if things would have been different if Forty had found better influences himself, but their husbands interrupt, joining the wives in the kitchen. Carrie ends up inviting Joe to recharge his masculine battery on a hunting trip, and Love encourages him to go so that he can get to know the guys better and give her time to focus on prepping for Henry's party. Before Joe can commit to the trip, the doorbell rings and Love answers to find Theo, who compliments her and then warns her not to park in the street, despite their cars already being in the driveway, as an obvious excuse to come talk to her. She checks in with him, attempting to ask if he's okay, but before he can answer, they're interrupted by Joe. Theo commends him on their immaculate lawn, and Joe remarks that the kid is weirder than ever, making Love defensive as she tells her husband to cut him some slack. Later that night, after Love puts Henry to bed, Joe asks her about the Uber charges on her credit card, and she explains that nobody looks out for Theo, so she just helps him get home when he needs a ride. Joe asks if there's something that she's not telling him, so Love admits Theo kissed her at the bakery, but assures Joe that she shut it down. He starts to get jealous and accuses Love of sneaking around, saying that she's been lying to him this whole time, and he punches the wall before snapping out of his rage. Love acknowledges that Joe is clearly not happy, but demands that he get his shit together, hoping that the hunting trip with the guys will sort him out. She walks off, and after Joe leaves the next morning without saying goodbye, Love heads to the bakery where she's visited by Theo. He orders one of everything but discovers that he's forgotten his wallet again, so Love offers him some muffins for free to serve as study fuel, which prompts Theo to reveal that he's taking some time off from school. Confirming her fear that he's falling down the wrong path like her brother, Love tells Theo that he could have talked to her about how he was struggling, but he reminds her that she drew the line at drunken Ubers. Theo admits that he heard Joe yelling the night before and expresses his concern, but Love assures him that she has friends her own age to talk to about her marriage. Theo snarks that Love is only friends with Sherry because she's the best option in town, and Love dismisses him, telling Theo that he'll understand the value of fitting in when he's older. He says that she's changed, and Love says that's not always a bad thing, turning back to work and trying not to crumble when she hears the door chime as Theo leaves and Love looks to see the muffins left behind. That night, while she's baking in preparation for Henry's party, Theo calls Love from the police station. Leaving her mother and Sherry to keep working on the decorations, Love rushes to the station to pick him up from his third DUI. She yells at Theo, saying that he could have killed himself or somebody else, but he thinks that's unlikely as he was arrested for drunkenly riding an electric scooter. He turns to Love with a mischievous smile, asking if she's ever ridden one. They get back out of the car and procure themselves a scooter, riding it speeding down a hill until they hit a bump and roll off on the grass together. More exciting than anything that she and Joe have ever done, Love laughs with Theo as they lay on the ground. After a moment, Theo tearfully confesses that he's flunking out of school because he can't stop thinking about Love, and he says that if she wants him to shut up then he will, but Theo admits that he doesn't know how to focus on class when all he wants is her. She tells him to shut up, but he refuses, accusing Love of playing house with Joe and not really being happy in her marriage. Love worries that he could be right and doesn't know how he's picking up on what she's trying so hard to hide, and she gets caught up in the need and desire of Theo staring at her, so Love leans in and starts kissing him, leading to a risky hookup on the grass. Afterward, Love returns home, having lied about running to the bakery, and Dottie calls her out, having seen Theo getting out of her car. Love insists that she was just helping him out and making sure he got home safe, but learns that she missed Henry's first steps because she was too busy with Theo. Dottie warns Love that Theo will distract her from her son, and she heeds her mother's warning, responding to his text by declaring that what happened will never happen again. She heads to bed, and the following morning, after Love finishes setting up for the party, Joe returns home just in time to get ready. But first, he pulls Love into a tight embrace, admitting that he needs to apologize because there are healthier ways for him to let his feelings out. Love offers her own apology for not being more forthcoming about Theo, and Joe affirms that he realized that she doesn't need to tell him everything because he trusts her. Love is amazed at Joe's change over the weekend, but they're interrupted by the arrival of partygoers at the door, so she sends him to shower and get ready, turning on a smile to greet their guests and then breezing through the day as hostess of a flawless first birthday for Henry. That night, as Love is riding the high of making a great impression on the community, she and Joe tap into their primal trust-filled passion again, and Love jokes about needing to soundproof the bedroom. Their moment is disrupted when Love receives an alert from the bakery security system, and Joe volunteers to check it out for her. Love watches the video feed through her phone as Joe secures the store and waits to the camera, and from behind her, Love hears Theo outside. She looks out to see him getting a blowjob in his backyard, and he looks up at her window, quietly confirming to Love that he's acting out to get her attention. A few days later, Love prepares to cook a weekend's worth of meals to keep her husband fed while she's away as a reminder to him that she's the best wife ever. She texts Joe to ask if he's on his way home, but he's stuck working late at the library, so she says that she's cooking his favorites and expects his excited reply when her phone chimes with a new message, but Love finds a text from Theo instead. She ignores the question of why she won't talk to him and eyes the pregnancy test on the counter. Taking it upstairs where she starts to pack for the weekend, Love gets another text from Theo pleading for her help. As much as she wants to explain that she can't talk to him, typing up a response before pulling back, Love sends another text message to 40's phone to vent her feelings to the one person who understood her. She confesses that she cheated on her soulmate and questions what's wrong with her, admitting that she might not even want to be pregnant while denying that it could be Theo's baby. Theo sends another text and Love swipes it away, getting up to pack her suitcase and then returning to the kitchen to start cooking. As Love simmers with dread over the upcoming weekend with her mother, she hears music start blasting outside and looks out the window to see Theo holding up a speaker in her driveway in an outrageous attempt to get her attention. Love rushes outside to quiet Theo and they settle between two cars for cover as she asks him what the fuck he's doing. He insists that he's being romantic according to the rom-coms of her generation and says that he needs her advice because Love is the only person that he trusts. Theo explains that his dad is isolating himself in his office and he doesn't know how to help him. Love assures Theo that Matthew is just grieving and encourages him to try and see where his dad is coming from. Theo then asks for permission to pose another question, getting the green light and using it to ask Love if she thinks about him when she has sex with her husband, saying that Love's face is the only one that Theo sees. She panics and physically turns Theo around to send him home, telling him to take care of his dad and rushing back into the house before anyone sees them together. Later that evening, Love texts 40 again, wondering if the new baby is a gift or a punishment. The oven dings and Love serves Joe the perfect bite, finishing her cooking before they race to the bedroom for another passionate primal romp, and Love finds herself fantasizing about Theo seductively tasting her frosting. In the morning, Love leaves to attend the Women Optimizing Motherhood and Business Summit with Henry, luckily being able to drop him off at the provided nursery. She finds her mother recording a video with Sherry, branding her vineyard as a hub for transformation, which prompts Love to snark internally as she watches on. Love greets her mother, who rudely remarks that she looks exhausted, but immediately offers Love some wine. When she declines, Dottie suspects that she's pregnant, asking if the father is Joe or Theo. But before Love can even deny it, her mother walks away and she makes her way to a book reading that leaves her with more questions than answers. The author starts up a Q&A and Love asks what a 21st century professional mother should do to find happiness. The woman offers useless platitudes like water your own grass and feel how green your own grass is, accusing Love of sabotaging her own happiness and suggesting that she read her book. Love dismisses the woman's message as a bunch of privileged bullshit and storms out of the room. She grabs a snack and texts 40 again until she's rejoined by her mother and Sherry. Dottie reaffirms Love, telling her that she is powerful, loved, and forgiven, and Love apologizes for her outburst. They say that they've already moved on and enlist Love to be a part of their IGTV interview. She watches from the side as they start to record until Dottie invites Love into the frame and introduces her, spilling the news of her potential pregnancy. Love grabs the phone and demands that Sherry give them space, criticizing her mother, who starts lecturing Love about her marriage again as if her own wasn't a complete failure. Love says that her life isn't her mother's to share and that Dottie is the reason her kids were so fucked up. Love realizes that Dottie only ever taught her that she was supposed to get the prince, build the castle, and then burn it all to the ground, an assessment that Dottie ignores as she calls her daughter an ungrateful little bitch for not appreciating everything that's been given to her. Dottie says that Love's unhappiness comes from being spoiled and bored and tells her to look in the mirror instead of spouting her hypocrisy at everyone else. She storms off and Love maintains her composure, getting the sense of her period starting and grabbing a bottle of wine to get drunk in her room. She prepares a bath and sends another text to 40, realizing that she's wasted when she seems to receive a response, and Love looks up to see her brother sitting in the tub with her. Desperate for the support, Love lunges to hug him, embracing 40 and asking if he's really here. He says that he lives inside of her and celebrates that he's the only thing living inside of her. Love starts to doubt if she should really be relieved, considering that another baby would give her something to focus on. 40 rejects the idea, asking if focusing is really what Love needs, and she admits that she doesn't know what she needs, recalling how she thought that she needed Joe, but finding that he just makes her feel bad for being herself. Love wonders aloud why she can't be happy, and 40 says that she lost her real soulmate. Love lays down and cries in bed, imagining her brother singing her to sleep as she drunkenly calls Theo before passing out. When she wakes up the next morning, she's joined by Sherry, who suggests that Love hasn't really been herself lately. Admitting that she's struggling with the discovery that Joe isn't her soulmate, Sherry calls bullshit on Love. She explains that a soulmate is something you choose and remembers how she and Carrie had fundamental problems in the beginning of their relationship, but she decided that he was her person and they made it work. Sherry says that it's not easy, but it's worth it, so Love returns to her room and writes one final goodbye text to her brother to allow her to move on and choose her new soulmate. Just then, Love hears a knock at the door and opens it to find Theo, who got an Uber to the vineyard after she drunk-dialed him during the night. While Love doesn't remember calling, Theo lets himself into the room, suggesting that he must be lingering in her subconscious. She tries to tell the kid that she cares about him, but they can't keep communicating, but Theo interrupts her to say that Matthew has spiraled into an insane conspiracy theory over Natalie's murder. He claims that his father has hired a private investigator to stalk people in town, including Love and Joe, so she picks up Henry from the nursery and gives Theo a ride home, frantically texting Joe that they need to talk. Waiting in the kitchen, Love's anxiety builds until Joe walks in and she explains the latest development in the Matthew situation. She suggests that they could exploit Theo's crush on her to find out what Matthew knows about them, and Joe hesitates but agrees that it's a great idea, assuring Love that he trusts her. The following days are a walk in the park as the couple have really found their groove, and Love beams as Joe wholeheartedly gives his all to a game night with the Conrads. After they leave and Love heads upstairs to change for bed, she spots Theo in the backyard and starts to undress in front of the window to tease him before texting him that she didn't realize he was there. She asks if he can meet her at the bakery and closes the curtains, turning to see Joe waiting in the doorway. He appears to be a little jealous, but Love assures him that it's no big deal, reminding Joe that they need to find out what Matthew has on them so they can fix it. Joe pulls Love onto the bed next to him, rubbing her feet as he breaks the news that he'll need to work late for the next week to prepare for a fundraiser at the library. Love asks if she should add the event to her calendar, but Joe says that it's going to be too boring to bother, and Love appreciates her husband being so thoughtful about her time. In the morning, after Joe has left for work, Love waits for Dottie to arrive to watch Henry so she can open the bakery. But after 3 hours, her mother is a no-show and Love calls Joe at the library to come home and pick up their son. As she waits, Sherry shows up, freaking out because the caterer for the library fundraiser fell through, but she suggests that Love can fill in, given her experience as a chef. Love hesitates at the opportunity, feeling as if her culinary dreams had been shelved when she moved to the suburbs, but Sherry insists and says that she'll handle all of the staff and logistics. Love agrees to the job and hugs Sherry for the chance to channel her passion for cooking again. Sherry notices that Love is glowing and she admits that she made the decision to choose Joe as her soulmate. But when asked about her sex life, Love excuses their lack of by claiming that Joe has been really busy with work. Sherry suggests that Love should tap into Joe's fantasies and make him feel like a man, offering on her way out to send Love a post that she wrote. Joe picks up Henry and Love finally opens the bakery, heading down to the basement just before 2 o'clock to wait for Theo, who surprises her by arriving early. He immediately tries to lean in and kiss her, so Love takes a step back, and Theo confesses that he's confused by her mixed signals. Love admits that he's right and leans into the messiness, hinting at having marital problems with Joe, but pulling back like she shouldn't burden him. Theo takes the cue to comfort her, telling Love that she's not alone, reminding her that they're friends and offering his help if she needs anything. So Love asks Theo to find out what Matthew's private investigator has dug up on her, explaining how anxious it makes her to think that somebody could have information that they want to use to hurt her family, and Theo understands, agreeing to sneak into his father's office to see what he found. The next day, as Love bakes in the kitchen, her mother arrives unannounced, wine bottle in hand, and she pours another glass to drown the pain of Ray using their divorce settlement to screw her out of not just Navrin, but her second act vineyard solely out of spite. While Love knows that her parents' marriage ending is really for the best, she still feels a type of loss and her mother apologizes for the disappointment. But Dottie insists that she did everything right and holds her divorce as a cautionary tale to Love about marrying the wrong man. Love regrets that her father treated Dottie horribly and says that's why she doesn't even speak to him anymore, but when Dottie starts to pour yet another glass of wine, Love tries to tell her mother that she's had enough. Unable to work through the discomfort of her feelings without drinking, Dottie angrily storms out of the house, berating Love for failing to offer a sympathetic ear. As she slams the door behind her, Love gets a text from Sherry with the blog post that she mentioned and takes it as a sign to spice up her marriage by dressing up to seduce Joe when he gets home. She greets him with a smile and a kiss and a little black dress, explaining that Sherry asked her to cater the library fundraiser. Joe is surprised and supportive, happy for Love, and sure that she'll do a great job, and she makes her move, trying to spontaneously blow Joe in the kitchen. But the mood isn't right, and he stutters that he's had a long day, so Love retreats, mortified by her own desperation, and she starts frosting cookies to move past the moment and keep herself from spinning out at Joe no longer finding her attractive. The next morning, Love is overwhelmed and accidentally burns an entire tray of almonds, shouting in frustration as Theo enters the kitchen, having let himself in since the front door was open. He shares that he hasn't gotten into his father's office yet, assuring Love that he will, but continuing on to confess that he's distracted by how much he wants her. Love starts crying as Theo offers her the obsessive attention that she's been wanting from Joe, and he apologizes as he rounds the counter to comfort her. She looks up at him with teary eyes, feeling his reassurance as a reminder of her brother, and noticing how much the boy looks like a younger version of her husband, she reaches out for the love and acceptance that Joe once promised, kissing Theo and hooking up in the kitchen to make up for the prior night's misfire. After he leaves, Love showers off the steamy encounter and returns downstairs to find that Joe has surprised her with a brand new sold-out Dutch oven as an apology. Love opens the lid to see strawberry sex crime donuts, calling back to the early passion of their adventures in LA. Joe smiles, admitting that donuts are not sexy on their own, but watching Love bite into one makes them the hottest thing on earth, and she feels a warmth spread throughout her body as she is painfully relieved to hear that Joe is still attracted to her. He kisses her and pulls her into a hug, comforting Love as she wipes away tears. She says that Dottie and her toxic marriage got into her head, and Joe understands, focusing on Love as he reassures her that they aren't her parents. With her ears burning, Dottie calls Love over FaceTime to say that she's on her way to come watch Henry, but Love tells her that they found another sitter, recognizing that her mother is drunk again and warning her not to drive before hanging up because she has enough on her plate. So Love gets dressed for the event and they drop off Henry, arriving at the library to find it completely decorated with a dreamy Alice in Wonderland theme. Sherry approaches in a panic, telling Love that she forgot to mark the guest allergies on her seating chart. Love is pulled away to help fill them in before the event starts, assisted by another woman who introduces herself as Joe's boss, Marianne. She says that Joe has talked so much about Love, but Love is taken aback by how pretty Marianne actually is, feeling like she doesn't align with what she had imagined from the way that Joe described her. As if reading Love's mind, Marianne admits that she can be a bossy pain in the ass, but she appreciates that Joe never complains about having to stay late or pick up her slack since she started seeing somebody new. Love is pleased to hear that Joe is really committed to his job as a volunteer and doing his part to help their son get into a good school. Their conversation is interrupted by a man waltzing into the library with a comically oversized check, and when Marianne mentions that he's her ex-husband, Love nods in understanding, maintaining an unimpressed attitude towards him as he approaches, and the librarian excuses herself. Love finishes filling in the charts and setting a few dessert tables while Sherry overlooks the event and revels in their success. She compliments Love and then impatiently asks if she's read the Hot Wife article yet. Love says that she didn't make it very far, and Sherry admits that sending it was her subtle attempt to allude to her and Carrie being polyamorous. She confesses that they're interested in Love and Joe, grazing her arm suggestively, asking if she would be game. But before Love can answer, she gets a payment request from her babysitter who says that Dottie came and picked up Henry. She frantically tries to call her mother but gets no answer until Dottie calls Love from the police station, having been arrested for a DUI after setting her old vineyard on fire, destroying the business that she built rather than let Ray get his hands on it. They all return home and Love sends Joe to put Henry to bed so that she can talk to her mother. She says that Dottie can stay the night and Joe will drive her to rehab in the morning, but draws the line that she will never see Henry or herself ever again. Dottie protests, believing that she's already been punished for making a mistake, and Love yells at her, screaming that she could have killed Henry. Refusing to indulge in her mother's avoidance of taking accountability for her own decisions, Love calls out Dottie for allowing her husband to destroy her self-worth and neglecting her children, leaving Love to protect her own brother. Dottie accuses Love of liking 40 better when he was broken because it gave her a purpose, but Love reminds her that she has a new purpose now, which is to protect her family, even if it means protecting them from her mother. The next day, Love keeps herself busy at the bakery to avoid thinking about the bittersweet end to her life as a Quinn, letting go of the last connection to the family that she long tried to escape, while Joe is tasked with driving Dottie to rehab before his shift at the library. He meets Love at the store later in the evening to help her clean up and close, and she takes the time alone to mention what Sherry told her about their open marriage, trying to gauge his response as she shares that the Conrads want to sleep with them. Joe laughs at the idea, so Love tries to play it off like a joke, but says that he hasn't looked at her the same or seemed interested in having sex with her. Joe claims that couples go through rough patches, and Love can't help but consider all of the rough patches that her parents went through, reminding him that she doesn't want their marriage to become the same, where they couldn't stay in love, and suggests that means they need to shake things up. Love attempts to make her case, and Joe responds with silence, so she drops the topic and starts to turn away, but he pulls her back, assuring her that she can come to him with anything and no idea is too crazy. Joe reaffirms that their marriage is based in talking things through and making decisions together, and Love is calmed by her husband's support, telling Joe that she loves him and embracing before they lock up and head home for the night. Later that week, Love tends to her garden as she watches Joe read a book about polyamory and checks in with him, asking if it's completely mortifying. He sighs and quotes from the book, reading, "Happily ever after is a myth because people are not static. Our partners do not owe us a guarantee that they will never change." And Love considers the statement, deciding that it sounds reasonable. Joe heads inside to wake up Henry from his nap, and Love finishes in the garden, cleaning up in the kitchen afterward. That evening, as they're getting ready for dinner, Love sneaks a moment away from Joe to respond to Theo's update that he hasn't found anything yet, thanking him with a smiley face. She stands across the island from him, and Joe shares the new word that he learned, defining compersion as vicarious joy from seeing your partner have joyful sexual relations with somebody else. Hearing Joe talk about it, Love feels her uncertainty boil over, and she voices her concern that they might not be in a solid enough place as a couple to swing with the Conrads right now. Joe asks if Love had ever tried swinging with her first husband, and Love says that James wasn't much of a risk taker and he fell ill pretty early into their marriage. She tells Joe how they were planning to have a baby, but James didn't know what he wanted, and then he got sick and used it like a shield against her so she could never be mad at him. Joe recognizes what she's been through and reassures Love that he isn't going anywhere. She says that swinging just isn't for her, and Joe corrects her, agreeing that swinging isn't for them, and Love breathes a sigh of relief, feeling like they're solidly on the same page. But later that night, Love starts to reconsider as she picks up a book of her own, which leads her into questioning if she really knows what she wants or who she is within her marriage, and wondering if she should take a risk and try something outside of her comfort zone. Love pats the bed for Joe to take his place beside her, and she tries to make a move, but he's too tired to return her affection, so she pulls away, asking how they're going to get back to themselves and accusing Joe of being bored with her. She leans back in, telling Joe that she wants to have a secret and still be fun and wild like they were in the first few months they were together in LA. Joe smirks at the reminder of their early relationship, and Love laments how that time of their life could be over. Suggesting that the Conrads seem more interesting since finding out that they swing, Love considers how she never got to explore before getting married. And Joe says that the last thing he wants to do is stand between Love and whatever she wants, asking if she has any fantasies. As Love gets excited just talking about different partners, they decide to meet with Sherry and Carrie for more insight into how the arrangement would work. In the morning, Love calls Sherry to meet up at the bakery, and the Conrads come prepared with an NDA and an openness to answer any questions the couple might have. Love asks if their marriage was rock solid before they started swinging, and they both shrug. Carrie claims that it wasn't as good as it is now, and Sherry says that their relationship grew rock solid through the trust falls of switching partners. Love looks to Carrie and imagines Joe looking at her like he's looking at Sherry, focused and committed, knowing that they keep choosing each other day after day, and Sherry offers to walk them through some questions to get an idea of what everyone is comfortable with. Joe easily accepts the pairing of Love and Sherry and hesitates but reassures Love that he trusts her when he's asked about Love having sex with Carrie. Love's confidence in the conquest builds with each question until Sherry asks about herself with Joe, and he surprises Love by denying as she agrees, prompting the Conrads to hit pause and pack up, leaving the couple to give them space until they're on the same page again. Love spends the following few days trying to refigure her plan to spice things up, and when she knows that her husband is home and Henry is down for a nap, she texts Joe to stop staring at her, drawing him to come watch outside as she pulls up her skirt to tease him with some skin. But just then, a football lands at the foot of her lounge chair and Theo appears over the fence, believing that she had been trying to get his attention. But Love says that she didn't even see him watching her, playing out the scene in front of Joe and flirting with Theo to try and trigger a passionate reaction out of him. She fakes a text from Joe to send Theo away and returns to her husband in the kitchen, asking how their roleplay made him feel, and his answer satisfies her, drawing closer to Love, saying that it made him feel possessive. Joe pulls her in and goes down on her in a way that only someone who knows her could, leaving Love feeling more confident about their relationship than ever. She confirms that Joe feels the same and sends him to call the babysitter to watch Henry, while Love reaches out to Sherry to reschedule their couples night. When the Conrads arrive, Love shows Sherry to the kitchen to open the wine that she brought while Carrie brings in their bags. The wives return to the living room, serving each other's husband their glass of wine, and Sherry makes a toast to a night that they won't forget. Before they all shake out their nerves around the coffee table, Love takes a long drink of wine to numb the discomfort of the sex venture that she's starting to second guess. As if Sherry can sense her uncertainty, she leads the couples in a grounding exercise, showing Love how to steady herself in the comfort of her partner's focused eye contact. While Love feels better for the moment, the men head upstairs and she's left alone with Sherry and her insecurities, drowning them in a few more glasses of wine before the wives relocate to the bedroom. Love is wasted by the time that Joe finally joins them, and she falls all over him, unconcerned with having an audience and ready to hand Joe over to Sherry to save their marriage from a collapse that she wouldn't survive. Love embraces the moment and hangs on to Carrie, kissing him until he encourages Love to watch Joe with Sherry. He looks to her to confirm that she's okay, and Love insists that she's more than okay, staring at Joe as she wills her statement to manifest. Breathing deep as she watches Sherry straddle her husband, Love considers that the night might turn out okay. But just as she starts to calm herself, she sees Joe close his eyes and start to fantasize, instinctively knowing that her husband has started stepping out again. Love screams out their safe word and Sherry whimpers as she complies, climbing off of Joe as Love storms out of the room to try and compose herself with another glass of wine in the kitchen. Joe joins her downstairs and Love confronts him over his guilt, demanding to know who he was thinking of and calling him out for never being satisfied with her, saying that no matter what she does, it's never enough for him. Joe argues that he hasn't ever abandoned Love and insists that all he does is worry about her, but she pushes back, telling Joe that she doesn't need his worry but his heart and dedication to their son. Love lays out everything that she's juggling as a mother to an infant, the owner of a business, the housekeeper for their home, and a wife that has to keep Joe interested 24/7 so he doesn't get bored and threaten their entire life they've built with another affair. Joe quietly yells for Love to lower her voice so that the Conrads don't overhear the truths that he can't stand to face, and Love refuses, shouting back that he made her kill Natalie because she did it for him. He grabs Love to quiet her, hearing footsteps creak upstairs, and they realize that the night has taken a turn. Unsure if anything was overheard, Love and Joe leave weapons outside of the bedroom door to defend themselves if needed. They enter the room to find Sherry massaging Carrie on the bed, and she suggests getting back into it, but rubs her elbow, signaling her deceit and cueing Carrie to shove Joe and run out of the room. Joe chases after him as Love slowly backs into the doorway to grab her knife and hold off Sherry in the bedroom. Love subdues the woman and knocks her out, dragging her unconscious down the stairs, where she looks over to Joe to steady herself in his eyes. He leads the way in relocating the couple to the cage in order to figure out their next steps, and once the danger has been contained, Love turns to Joe and pulls him in, trying to escape the violence of the night into the best and most intense sex that they've had in their marriage. But the following morning, Love sobers up, and it starts to dawn on her that she's locked her best friend in a cage. Joe brings her a cup of tea in bed, and she embraces him tight, expressing her deep gratitude to have him, knowing that he understands what she's going through in a way that nobody else could. As she lays out her plan to cook breakfast and call the babysitter to watch Henry longer, assuring Joe that they're going to get through this together, he jumps up to get dressed, explaining that he forgot he was filling in for Dante at the library and he's going to be late. Joe tells Love not to do anything until she gets back, so she gets dressed and opens the bakery, watching the door with every chime as she waits for her husband to arrive. When he finally shows, she pulls out her phone to see that their guests are waking up, and she turns to Joe, staring into his eyes as she promises him that they're a team. Love plays her part to maintain appearances for the couple, manning the bakery while she works out how to take care of the Conrads, and Joe is left to clean up the mess at home. Love delivers baked goods to their visitors in the basement like she once brought muffins to the storage unit for Joe, and she's caught off guard by Sherry's unexpected concern for her own feelings as she stands outside the cage. Love accuses her of acting weird, but Sherry gestures to her surroundings and turns back to Love, asking how she's doing on the letter for Henry's preschool. Distracted by Sherry's disruptive suggestion of swinging, Love forgot all about the admission letter that was due by this afternoon. She starts to panic, and Sherry offers her help, correcting Love that it's actually a letter of introduction for the counselor. Theo texts Love telling her that he needs to talk, and Sherry continues, promising Love that she would never sabotage Henry's future, but warning her that she only has one chance to get him admitted to the prestigious school. Love looks back to her phone and replies to Theo, avoiding him for his own sake, but he says that it's about Joe, and she invites him to the bakery to talk. He shares what he found in his father's office, explaining that Matthew has been tapping into all of the cameras in town, and he's seen a video from the night that Joe hit a wall in front of Love. She wonders if Matthew suspects anything about her, and Theo assures that he doesn't. He says that his dad kicked him out and he's not going back to his mom's, begging Love to run away with him. Reminded of a similar plea to start over in Paris with Joe, Theo confesses his love for Love and challenges her to honestly tell him that her husband isn't a violent man. When she can't do that, Theo plans to retrieve the footage and use it as blackmail against Joe so Love can make a clean break from her marriage. She plays along as Theo promises that he'll take care of her, and Love heads inside where she tries to call Joe but gets no answer, frantically texting him that they have another problem. Love does her best to manage it all, returning to the basement with Sherry's phone to unlock it and cover for her absence with a post about going off the grid. Sherry asks if Love can send her twins their daily check-in email at camp, and she obliges, respecting Sherry on some level for being an attentive mother. But Love recognizes how Sherry is still playing a version of herself, telling her to stop acting like they're friends, and Sherry says that they are friends, or at least they were, and that the way that she came to care about Love didn't just go away. Admitting that she always knew Love had secrets but thought that she understood her, Sherry confesses that her influencer career is just her method of maintaining a sense of control, allowing her to pick and choose her own flaws. Love remarks on how that kind of life landed her in a cage, and Sherry laughs, suggesting that she's been trapped in a cage of her own making ever since she got married, considering her current predicament to be inevitable. Love feels seen and intrigued and ready to vent to her best friend, confiding in Sherry that Theo tried to convince her to run away with him, and Matthew has been spying on the whole neighborhood to figure out who killed Natalie. Sherry encourages Love to expose him using her blog, so Love returns home and rips out their doorbell camera before publishing her Matthew expose and watching out the window as a wave of lawyers overtake the Angler house next door. Joe arrives home and Love fills him in on everything that's happened, beaming with pride in her ability to handle things on her own. Love commends Joe on cleaning up so well as she wraps her arms around him and she feels something in the back of his waistband. She pulls out a gun that Joe says he found in one of Carrie's bags, and Love is stunned that the Conrads would bring such a thing into their home. She realizes that the couple are even crazier than she thought they were and considers if they could use the weapon against them, arranging a murder-suicide story like the last time. Love looks up at Joe, biting her lip as she awaits his response, and he brushes her face while he agrees with the idea. She visits the cage later in the night to deliver new bandages for Carrie after his crossbow showdown with Joe, and Sherry comments that she hasn't seen him since last night. Love ignores her remark, and Sherry continues to blame Joe for the whole situation, hitting a nerve with her when she brings up his affair with Natalie. Love turns away from Sherry, who asks where Joe is now, accusing him of leaving her to fix a marriage that never stood a chance in the first place, and Love decides that she's had enough and doesn't need to hear any more. She turns back and leaves the gun in the pass-through box, declaring to the couple that whoever shoots the other will get to leave. Sherry shrieks at Love, calling her insane, and Love says that if her marriage is so perfect, then they can die together. She rushes upstairs to text Joe, but remembers that she's capable of handling the situation on her own and deletes the message draft, leaving to dispose of Carrie's bandages in a dumpster across town. When she returns to the bakery, Love gets a voice message from Joe's coworker Dante asking if he should put Henry to bed. While she expected that Joe would have picked him up by now, Love tells Dante that she'll get back to him, but she's delayed when she enters the back room of the store and finds Theo in the dark. She asks what he's doing, and his eyes give him away, looking to the basement as he struggles to answer, and Love realizes that he's been downstairs and Theo has seen the cage and the Conrads. He looks to the key in his hand, and Love recognizes his plan to let them out, even as Theo claims that he doesn't believe what they said about her. Love steps inside, remaining calm to maintain control, and asks what they say that she did. Theo recounts that the Conrads accuse Love of killing Natalie, but he says that he has evidence Joe is responsible for her disappearance. Desperate for the video that would incriminate her husband and ruin her son's future, and not wanting to think about what Joe would do if he found out that Theo had such a thing, Love pleads with him to leave Madre Linda and never look back. Theo begs her to come with him, and she shuts down the suggestion, insisting that she can't leave her family. Realizing the danger that her relation to Theo poses, she makes him swear that they will never see each other again. Theo agrees, promising to do whatever Love wants, and she tries to send him away, but stops him to get the key back before he leaves. When he hesitates and looks to the basement, Love assures him that she's going to free the Conrads as soon as he's gone, and despite forcing a smile, Love can sense that Theo doesn't believe her. He says goodbye to Love and turns to leave the bakery, but she doesn't trust him to keep quiet about Joe, so she attempts to knock him out with the fire extinguisher. But as Theo had left the door open after snooping around the basement, he bounces off the wall of the landing and tumbles down the stairs. The ground shakes beneath her and Love feels out of body as she looks down to see that the boy has ended up just like her brother when she had only wanted to stop him from leaving with the secrets that would destroy her family. She races home to reach the safety of her husband's embrace, imagining Joe holding her as tight as he did the day that Forty died, and Love has an epiphany. She realizes that her brother was wrong, she has been a good mother, and ready to start a new chapter, Love thinks about growing their family with a sibling for Henry, eager to share her idea with Joe. Love returns home and calls out for Joe, finding him upstairs in Henry's room and falling into the chair beside him. She says that they need to figure out how to handle the Conrads and anxiously shares the news of a bake order at the bakery to preface her suggestion for a baby, but Joe interrupts, noticing the blood on her sleeve. Love is forced to confess that Theo came back to the store and she had to leave him there in the basement. She looks away, trying to shake the imagery from her mind, and Joe kneels before her, promising to take care of him so she doesn't have to give it another thought. Encouraged by his reassurance, Love takes Joe's hands in her own and shares her idea to expand their family. Joe stares into her eyes as if telepathically tuning into Love's vision for their future, and she hangs on his gaze, awaiting his eager acceptance. He breaks the silence, declaring that there is nothing more he wants in the world, and Love rejoices, exclaiming in excitement and breathing a sigh of relief at his commitment to their family. The following morning, as she sits in the nursery before work, Love dreams of having a daughter and scrolls through inspiration for baby names. Finding comfort in the memory of the hope that their young relationship once promised, after Love first shared the news of her pregnancy, she grounds herself in the potential as she speaks the name Julia Quinn Goldberg and knows in her heart that it's the one. But Love's emotional reprieve is short-lived when she attempts to empty the overflowing diaper genie and finds one of Joe's t-shirts covered in seemingly fresh blood. She's enraged as she realizes that he has killed somebody in secret after refusing to protect his own family, and overcome with betrayal that Joe would leave her to do his dirty work for him when he's capable and happy to kill for somebody else. Sickened by the recollection of Joe imagining this other woman in their bed, Love heads to the bakery where she overhears the news of a local reporter's murder, Ryan Goodwin supposedly stabbed to death in a mugging. She remembers the name as one of the reporters on the Angler case who later showed up to the library fundraiser, where Love recalls that he and Joe shared a weird interaction and she learned that the man was Marianne's ex-husband. The story becomes clear and Love knows that her husband is cheating again, killing Ryan for Marianne while abandoning her and Henry emotionally to start over with somebody else. Kiki appears at the counter to order a batch of bloody-themed cupcakes for her book club to discuss Ryan's murder. But even as Kiki accuses Marianne of the crime, Love can't hold back her hatred any longer and snaps at the woman, calling her out as a scandal-hungry viper feasting on other people's pain. Kiki is taken aback, and others in the vicinity seem to have overheard Love's remarks, so she apologizes and excuses it away as PMS, saying that she'll have the cupcakes ready by this evening. She grabs a pie for the Conrads and heads to the basement to ground herself and work through her feelings with Sherry. Love spills the latest development, admitting out loud that Joe is having another affair, and Sherry encourages her to kill him, accusing Joe of betraying Love. She stares at Sherry, clawing at her own survival at the expense of her husband, and realizes that she was never anything to aspire to. Love calls her a monster and says that she always knew her marriage was a sham before leaving the Conrads to fade away into obscurity. She returns home to devise a plan to save their marriage, knowing that her husband will try to run away rather than face their conflict, and decides that it's time to bring out the aconite. Love prepares a roast chicken for dinner to remind Joe of the night when she first opened her heart to him, taking him on a tour around the city that she loved and inviting him to see a softer side of her in the vulnerability of her kitchen. But now fully cognizant of the depth of the darkness that she recognized in her husband long ago, Love coats the handle of the carving knife with just enough homemade paralytic to disable Joe if he tries to grab a weapon and lash out, but not enough to accidentally kill him. Refusing to give up on her marriage, Love greets Joe with a smirk when he returns home and directs him to sit in the dining room, joining him to serve dinner while ensuring that she handles the knife with protection to avoid absorbing the paralytic. She takes a bite of chicken to show Joe that it isn't poisoned and sings her own praises to build up to her confrontation. Love recounts the news about Ryan and his connection to Marianne, cutting Joe off before he can begin to lie, demanding to know if he loves the other woman. His silence speaks volumes, and Love's chest tightens as Joe avoids her gaze. She asks if he ever actually loved her, and Joe claims that he has from the moment he first saw her, but she knows that he's cheating on her. Love calls him out for acting like he was happy and committed to their family while leaving her to hold everything together because he was too busy sneaking off to kill for another woman. She regrets that she had to hurt Theo over the video of Joe losing his temper, but Joe accuses her of having an affair with the boy and says that they can deal with the situation like adults without doing anything impulsive. Love questions what he means by that, and Joe claims that her mother suggested that she killed her first husband when he tried to leave her. He says that they can part ways amicably and co-parent Henry, and Love is speechless as Joe's words register and he announces that he wants a divorce. Just then, Henry starts crying and Love rushes out of the room to check on him and compose herself for what happens if she returns to her husband being hostile. When she enters the dining room, Love sees that Joe has grabbed the knife to wield as a weapon and must be holding it under the table while playing it cool up top. She takes a seat closer to him to give the aconite time to take effect and distract Joe from catching on. Love explains how she expected that doing everything right would lead life to turn out like it's supposed to, and she recounts her reasonable expectation that taking care of James while he was sick would mean that he'd want to stay with her when he got better. Love admits that her mother was partly right. She did accidentally kill James after he asked for a divorce because she tried to dose his food to stop him from leaving so they could talk, but it went wrong. She assures Joe that she's changed the method this time, and he realizes what she means, dropping the knife too late to avoid the effects that are starting to set in. Love points out how this wouldn't be happening if Joe didn't grab a weapon to attack her, but Joe doesn't respond. He slips out of his chair onto the ground, and Love rolls him over to retrieve his phone and lure Marianne to the house, sending her a text to come over right away. She leaves to deliver Kiki's bloody cupcakes and returns just in time to meet Marianne at the door and reveal that she was the one who sent the text message. Love insists that Marianne come inside so they can speak like adults and demands to know why she chose to sleep with Joe out of all of the men in Madre Linda. The librarian claims that she thought they were splitting up, and Love says that's news to her, forcing Marianne to reconsider what she's been doing by hooking up with a married man. The woman alleges that she's a good person, or at least trying to be, and Love reiterates the question, asking Marianne if Joe appealed to her because he seemed kind and understanding and like good father material. She says that he was those things at first, but she should have sensed something was too good to be true and trusted her gut instead of allowing Joe to convince her. Marianne suggests that she's attracted to toxic men, and Love scoffs at the word, which shows that the woman doesn't understand Joe at all. So she reveals the real Joe, telling Marianne that he was the one who killed her ex-husband in an apparent mugging. Marianne disbelieves at first, and Love prepares to strike as she explains that Joe has become obsessed with her, but they're interrupted by the woman's daughter opening the front door. Love is snapped out of her trance and returns to reality, offering for the girl to use their bathroom down the hall. As she realizes that Joe has cheated on her, not with a bored homewrecker but a hardworking single mother, Love knows that it would be immoral and hypocritical to kill her. She decides to save the woman from her husband while showing Joe that she is the only one who will love him by exposing his darkness to Marianne so he can watch her recoil as she's scared into running away. Love warns Marianne that Ryan is just the beginning of what Joe is willing to do, and Marianne asks why Love wouldn't leave herself, but she says it's not as simple for her. Marianne pushes back, insisting that Love should listen to her inner voice telling her that she deserves better, and Love lets Marianne leave with her daughter. The authenticity of the woman's understanding weighs on Love as she reconsiders her situation, recognizing how Joe has driven her insane, and she feels every doubt that she's had about them come rushing back at once. Her mind soars through a supercut of every patient reassurance and declaration of love, realizing that Joe never meant a word that he said something moved. Love returns to the kitchen, pulling out a meat cleaver to sharpen while reflecting on Joe's gaslighting. She recalls how excited she was to get married and have a baby, but accuses Joe of punishing her for their shared dream and laments how unrecognizable she's become. Love calls out how Joe made her question everything about herself, but the librarian's advice showed her the truth, and Love decides that she's done ignoring the voice in her head that's been telling her her husband is the problem. She charges to the dining room to save her son from a future corrupted by his emotionally unavailable father and lifts Joe's head by his hair, but he stabs her in the thigh with a syringe and Love stops dead in her tracks, dropping to the ground as a painful burning spreads through her body. Joe confesses to preparing his own dose of aconite and taking adrenaline before he was paralyzed by the knife, claiming that he needed to finally stop Love. She says that they're perfect for each other, but bad for Henry, and with her last breath, looking her husband in the eyes, Love predicts that their son will know what kind of man he is. Following her death, an email featuring a confessional feminist manifesto attributed to Love was sent out to all of her contacts. She was considered guilty for the death of Natalie Angler and Gil Brigham and the murder of her husband, Joe Quinn Goldberg. Her son Henry was left on the doorstep of a local couple, and Love's body was discovered in the burned debris of her suburban home, along with human remains suspected to be her husband's. But a few years later, Joe Goldberg returned to New York with a new wife, making her stepmother to Love's son, until Joe attempted to kill her and she tricked him into confessing for Love's murder. Joe abandoned their child to escape consequence, and Henry rejected his father as a monster, getting a second chance at a happy childhood, protected from Joe's toxic influence and surrounded by unconditional love. Unable to make it far on his own, Joe Goldberg was captured and convicted for covering up the deaths in Madre Linda, framing Dr. Nicky for the murder surrounding Guinevere Beck, and for killing his first wife, Love Quinn.